How you doing, Brian?
Good. How are you tonight?
Well,
Good. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Give us a call. We'll calculate your savings for you. Plus, you'll get fast speeds and over 99.9% network reliability. $49.99 with 200 megabit per second internet and $19.99 for business phone. Get 1 month free plus free installation when you call 855-798-8787 today. Weather of the Woman's is brought to you by serving breakfast biscuits all day, every day. It's Photo Time.
Next to go, just want to check and make sure everything's good here.
Hi, Deidre and Adam. How are y'all?
Doing well. Just getting set up.
Cool. And your audio sounds good as well.
Deidre, did you want to try to share your screen real quick?
Chris, how are you today?
Oh, I'm doing fine. How are you, sir?
I'm well. And your mic sound,
Pardon me?
I said, and your mic sounds good.
Oh, thank you.
How are you, Michael and Deidre?
Good evening, everybody.
Could you hear me?
I hear you. You sound.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
So Councilmember Parker, have you shared your red manila folders with Karen Stegman? We'll have to share
I had to
with,
dig them out of the archives.
we'll have to share with her our wisdom.
Hello, hello.
Was that Ty?
Yes, sir.
Okay. How you doing? And how you doing, Colleen?
Hi, good evening.
Oh, let's see here. That's number 5. Yeah.
How are you, Camille?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm well. And your mic sounds good.
Excellent.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me, Marquise?
I can. Sound good. And how are you today, Ann?
Hi, Marquis.
Sound good. How you doing?
Hey, Council. Hey. Are you dressed?
How you doing, Alexandra?
Three minutes.
How you doing, Mary Jane?
Hi, I'm fine. How are you?
I'm well.
Good.
Who else came in? Amy Olin?
Hi, how are you?
I'm well. All right. And your microphone sounds good. Did I miss Brian Litchfield?
We talked earlier. Good to see you again.
Okay.
Thank you.
And how you doing, Rhonda Deep? And
I'm
Eric?
good, thank you.
Good.
Two minutes.
Howdy, everyone.
Hello.
Hello.
How you doing, Maurice?
Doing very well, sir. How are you?
I'm well. And Paris, how are you tonight?
Hi, good evening. I'm good. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Awesome, thanks.
There are so many boxes on our screen.
I'm not sure that I'm keeping up.
I don't know how you could. Pages of boxes.
All right, 30 seconds.
30 seconds. So exciting.
Ten seconds. And we're live.
And we're live.
Good evening, everyone, and Happy New Year. Welcome to the Chapel Hill Town Council's January 5th, 2022 work session. I am Mayor Pro Tem Karen Stegman. I am not the mayor. You may have noticed. Mayor Heminger is feeling under the weather this evening, so I'll be running the meeting tonight in her stead. So this is our first meeting of the new year and the first meeting for our new council members. So welcome to them as well. And so this evening we have 4 items on the agenda. We'll be talking about whether the town should take ownership of the downtown portion of Franklin Street. We'll be talking about ideas for the appropriation of excess funds from the 2021 fiscal year. We will be talking about a long-range planning initiative requested by the town council in response to the recent housing needs analysis that we received in the fall. And just to note, these 2 items have switched. So that's going to be first, and then the update from our planning staff on the land use management ordinance rewrite project will be the last agenda item. And Rod Stevens, our consultant who conducted the long range, the housing needs analysis, will be joining us for that item. So we're glad to have him with us tonight. Additionally, I want to remind council there is a short, emphasis on short, closed session immediately following tonight's meeting. And you should have seen an email about that on instructions for how to join. So tonight's meeting is a work session. We do appreciate public comment at work sessions. If there is time at the end of the meeting, we will allow a few minutes for public comment if there are folks interested in speaking. depending on how long the meeting goes. And at that time, you'll be able to use the raise hand function if you're interested in speaking, or push *9 via phone to signal your interest in making a comment, 3 minutes or shorter. And you can also always email the council to share any feedback you have at mayorandcouncil@townofchapelhill.org. Next, in keeping with state law, we will begin with a roll call. Please signal your presence verbally and with a wave, and then mute yourself as I call your name. Councilmember Jess Anderson.
I'm used to being second. Okay. Hey, here.
Mixing it up. Thank you. Councilmember Camille Berry.
Here.
Welcome. Councilmember Tai Huynh.
Present.
There you are. Councilmember Paris Miller Fushi.
Hi, present.
Councilmember Michael Parker.
Here.
Councilmember Amy Ryan.
Here.
Councilmember Adam Searing.
Hello, everyone.
Welcome. And Mayor Pro Tem Karen Stegman is here as well. Thanks, everyone. A few quick announcements before we get into our agenda items. First, we want to extend our thoughts and prayers to the 2 middle school students who were badly injured on New Year's Eve. Their families and friends are in our thoughts and have been since that time. We're devastated that this has happened, and we know it has been a traumatic impact for our community. Extensive bike and pedestrian improvements are already planned for Estes Drive this spring. But in the meantime, we are looking at taking steps to make the area safer for people when they were walking or biking in the area. Additionally, members of our town's crisis unit are working closely with the schools and community members to provide support. And if you are having any difficulty or need anything, please don't hesitate to reach out. I also want to remind the public of 3 upcoming meetings. The Council Committee on Economic Sustainability will be meeting this Friday at 8. The main item on the agenda is the police station site on MLK and plans for that. And next week, there will be 2 public information meetings. The first on Monday, January 10th at 5:15 will cover the Aspen Heights student housing project that is proposed for 701 MLK Drive. And the second is on Thursday next week, the 13th at 5:15, and we'll focus on the J Street affordable housing project that is also proposed. These meetings will all be virtual, and the public is encouraged to attend. More information is available on the calendar page of the town's website. So that's it for announcements. Council, does anyone have anything else you'd like to share before we move on? Nope. All right, great. Well, then we will start with our first agenda item, guidance to staff about whether the town should take ownership of the downtown portion of Franklin Street.
Hi, good evening, Mayor and Council. Can you all hear me? Yes, great, thank you. Let me share my screen and get started. Is that looking right in presentation mode? Great, thank you. Good evening, my name is Bergen Watterson. I'm the Transportation Planning Manager for the town. Nice to meet you virtually for those who I haven't met before. Tonight, I'm gonna be talking about some considerations for Franklin Street downtown. Now, this has been a topic of conversation for a while now. I'm gonna hand it off to Sarah Poulton about halfway through the presentation. So we have about 15 slides, and it should take maybe 15 minutes. These 15 slides have a lot of information packed in. So here's an overview of what we're going to cover. It's been a while since we've been at council to talk about, sorry, I need to fix my screen, to talk about Franklin Street. And I want to make sure to do a review of the timeline of recent decisions and changes especially for the new council members, but a review for everybody involved. And I'm going to talk about some information specific to West Franklin Street pertaining to a lane reallocation that we pursued over the last couple of years, and some information about what we're calling our in-road multi-use path that's out there now, at least temporarily. And then I'll hand it off to Sarah Poulton, talk about some information that we've gleaned and cost estimates that we have, and considerations related to the possibility of taking over maintenance of Franklin Street from NCDOT. I know it's a work session, so there's no action really to be taken tonight, but we are hoping for guidance tonight. Hopefully some fairly as clear as possible guidance, since we do, for some of these considerations, have a looming deadline, which I'll talk about in just a minute. So let's see, this all started, I remember coming to a work session at the library back when we used to do this in person. October of 2019, we received a petition from the Chapel Hill Downtown Partnership to consider putting bike lanes on West Franklin Street. This was in advance of NCDOT planning to resurface West Franklin in the summer of 2020. And council was in support of that. So we engaged with a consultant and worked very hard in those few months before COVID happened in March of 2020 to get the pavement marking plans and the traffic analysis done, work with DOT, get it all approved and ready to go. And then COVID hit, and the resurfacing was delayed from summer of 2020. That was the contractor, that was nothing to do with us or Carborough. It was DOT and the contractor making that decision. And that was the plan at that point, to put in what we're calling a traffic running bike lane, which is your traditional bike lane that's between either the curb or the parked cars and the moving traffic. We have those plans mostly approved. In August 2020, in response to COVID and the needs of the downtown businesses and the desires of people to have more space to walk and roll and physical distance downtown, we installed the temporary walkway in the road with the barriers, and that was in response to the Feats on Franklin petition, as well as some economic development interests. May 2021, NCDOT delayed the resurfacing again that we were expecting to happen in the summer of 2021 due to an almost emergency OWASA project that's to be done on Main Street in Carborough, which is part of the resurfacing contract. In September of 2021, the town started receiving some ADA complaints about the temporary walkway, and we've made some adjustments and changes to that in response to those. And then just a couple of months ago, in October, the town was petitioned again by the Chapel Hill Downtown Partnership to explore transferring maintenance. So just a reminder that Franklin Street is owned and maintained by NCDOT. It's not a town road. So that's sort of the crux of why we're here tonight. So to go over in a little more detail in the next 3 slides, some of the options for doing the lane reallocation on West Franklin. And again, this would go from Columbia to Merritt Mill. We're not considering East Franklin here. That was already resurfaced a few years ago. So this is a rendering of the design that was essentially approved by NCDOT a couple of years ago. We worked with our design consultant. It's all but ready to go at this point. They just need some minor tweaks. There are some advantages to this design. There are fewer conflicts with driveways. So as we know, Franklin Street has a lot of driveways for businesses, for parking lots. There's also a lot of intersections. And so this provides bicyclists, they're more visible, they're out in the road, they're more easily seen. This on-street parking would be minimally affected. In fact, I think we ended up being able to add 1 or 2 spaces and a loading zone or 2 with this design. Some of the drawbacks are that the bikes are there, they're next to moving traffic. They're not physically separated, whether that's by some sort of barrier or even in this, we're showing a 2-foot buffer on both sides of between the parked cars and the moving traffic, but there's no physical separation. The other option, and this image shows the curb running bike lanes, which is what we're calling them. These are bike lanes that run adjacent to the curb that are separated by parked cars where there is on-street parking. These are, these are good. They're the bikes are physically separated from moving vehicles. You see a lot of these videos of New York City, especially. Those are the ones I always see where cars are just parked all over the bike lane. Delivery trucks are in there. Just anything and everything is blocking the bike lane. That's a little bit more difficult in this design. Some of the drawbacks of this, and we've received a few emails about this as well. There's some visibility concerns. If you're riding, the parked cars make it harder for vehicles to see the bikes riding in the lane. There are conflicts with driveways and intersections and, parking. And the on-street parking would be significantly reduced with this option, because in order to make the bikes more visible, you'd have to pull the parking pretty far back from all of the intersections and the driveways to ensure that those sight triangles are good for cars that are trying to turn onto Franklin. This option was one of the ones considered back in 2020. It ultimately was discarded due to fire access concerns on some parts of Franklin, that the fire trucks not being able to reach the buildings. Those concerns have apparently been alleviated after we've put in the temporary barriers, because it's kind of the same design. So that is not, it has not been approved by DOT. So if we do want to consider this option, there's some pretty good work that needs to be done to get there in terms of the design and negotiation with DOT. This option would require additional equipment like leaf blower and snow removal if it's going to be physically separated from the rest of the road. Just some considerations about that. Both of these options require transit stop adjustments. Transit has been doing a review of their bus stops related to ADA accessibility. And with both of these options, transit will struggle with the crown of the road. It's really Franklin Street is kind of sloped pretty significantly on both sides, making even just accessing something that's in the road difficult due to the slope. They've been working on it, but to make it truly ADA accessible, there would be some upgrades needed to the road. And additionally, both of the options, the traffic running and the curb running, still need, this was a Kumar estimate, about $250,000 in traffic signal adjustments and planning, and a redesign of the Merritt Mill traffic island, that in order to make the bike lanes and a turn lane still be possible at that location to continue into Carborough. And if this is something that we are going to do, both of these options, we need to let DOT know by March of this year, so that they can get all of that to the contractor for the resurfacing this summer. And then just some considerations about our temporary multi-use path. This is not something that could remain in place if DOT, even whether we maintain the road or DOT, this is just not something. The street is too crowned. It's too sloped on the sides to make this. It's not ADA accessible. I don't know if anybody's ever run walking. You don't notice it as much. I know I run on Franklin, and I do just because I have to. I love to run in the walkway, and you can really feel it when you're on there. It's like running on the side of a hill. And to make this truly ADA accessible, it would require a lot more design and consideration, including what DOT is planning to do on the road. They're going to mill the road and they're going to resurface it. They're not going to try to reduce the crown. They're not going to try to even out the road. So if we want to do something like that, there'd be a lot more work to be done on the part of the town to make that possible. I think with that, I'm going to hand it over to Sarah to talk about the considerations related to the maintenance transfer.
Great. Thank you, Bergen. Good evening, everyone. Greetings, especially to our new council members. My name is Sarah Polton. If I haven't gotten a chance to meet you yet, I'm a special project manager in the town manager's office. I have about 5 more slides talking about what it means to transfer maintenance of Franklin Street from the North Carolina Department of Transportation to the town, including why we might want to do it, what responsibilities we would take on in addition to what we already do for the street, and then what it could cost. I really want to thank the public works staff, seemingly all of them, for pulling together some cost estimates. And there are 2 members of the public works staff here tonight. So if we have any questions that Bergen and I can't answer, they might be able to do that. So really appreciate that staff for pulling this together, pulling the cost estimates together. So I'll ask Bergen to advance the slide. Thank you. So right now, today, the way that the maintenance works on Franklin Street is that the DOT currently maintains what we call curb to curb, which includes the curb itself, so the white part of the curb, and then the entire asphalt blacktop part of the street. They resurface the street, they fix potholes, they paint crosswalks, things of that nature. And the town, what we do is we maintain and replace the sidewalk itself. So that's the sidewalk, the brick strip, the trees, things of that nature, and the curb. So this is kind of what it looks like now. And this map shows what part of Franklin Street is kind of what we call the study area, the area that we are looking at. And the cost estimates that you see would be this part of the street. It's about 0.96 miles between Raleigh Road and Merritt Mill. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so why would we even consider taking over maintenance of the street? Here is a list of questions, or a list of considerations, I should say, or challenges that we have with the street being controlled by the NCDOT at this point. Some others might add others to this list, I should say. But one of the big reasons that the town and NCDOT just have somewhat different philosophies for Franklin Street. The town really sees Franklin Street and downtown as a destination. We want people to come to downtown, whereas DOT's philosophy around streets is to get people mostly in single occupancy vehicles from point to point. That's their philosophy. Doesn't make it wrong, it just makes it different. NCDOT also must approve any projects that we want to do in the right of way, and that includes transit stops. So anytime we want to make any change to the street, the pavement markings, the crosswalks, things of that nature, they all have to go through DOT. There's also really an aging stormwater infrastructure system underneath Franklin Street, which is causing problems right now, to be quite frank. We're aware of some of them, and there's probably others we're not aware of. When we want to do something innovative to Franklin Street, DOT has to approve that, and they usually say no, which is a challenge and kind of can be a little limiting in the interesting things that we want to do with the street. And then also NCDOT gets funding for Franklin Street that makes it that prohibits the use of the asphalt, the actual street, for commerce, meaning that businesses can't use the street to make money. An example of that might be a business maybe building a platform on a parking space and opening up a parklet where they serve food out of their restaurant. That's prohibited based on NCDOT's funding. So that is a challenge that we've gotten that request before, especially around COVID, and we can't allow it because of NCDOT's funding structure. Ask you to move that forward. Thank you. So what would change? I talked a little bit about what we already do, but here's kind of a delta list for you. So what we already pay for is the construction of sidewalk and brick, and of course the maintenance and repair of that sidewalk and brick. The town does that. We also do the street sweeping, which is a lot more frequent in downtown than it is in other parts of town. We collect the trash and recycling and pressure washing in the right of way. We do parking space, loading zone, and other painting that's not crosswalk related. So a fair amount of painting in downtown. The downtown partnership pays for planter upkeep. So all those lovely raised brick planters they maintain. And then we also maintain the trees, which is no small feat, as Parks and Rec would love to tell you. It's not easy. So what would we be adding if we took over the maintenance of Franklin Street? These are just four bullet points, but they're big ones. So of course, the stormwater infrastructure that lives underneath the street, the traffic signal adjustment. So anytime we need to adjust the timing or number of stoplights, things of that nature, all of that would be our responsibility should we take over maintenance. We'd add painting of the crosswalk, and then we would also just add general maintenance of the street, everything from resurfacing, the snow removal, and that would apply to bike lanes as well. So if we added bike lanes, we would probably, like Bergen mentioned, have to potentially purchase additional equipment for maintaining those bike lanes. Awesome. But, again, why would we want to do this? What could change if we transfer maintenance? We could explore things like parklets, colorful crosswalks, and other types of innovations that DOT is a little hesitant to approve right now. We're very hesitant. We can emphasize those vulnerable road users and not just think about single occupancy vehicles, but really think about all people that use the street. And then we could update that stormwater infrastructure, which we know is a challenge right now. However, some things are not going to change if we take over Franklin Street. The town is still required to follow federal design guidelines, what they call the MUTCD guidelines, the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices. We're still required to follow that. So there are certain things DOT says no to because MUTCD says no to it, and we would probably say the same thing. And then also, as Bergen mentioned, the current construction and configuration of the street itself is crowned, and that wouldn't change just because we took over maintenance of the street. It would require a pretty significant reconstruction in order to be ADA compliant. So here is a snapshot of the costs that Public Works put together for us as just kind of an idea of what it would cost to take over Franklin Street and the maintenance. And I know we got some questions before the meeting today, so I expect we'll come back to this slide, but I'll do my best to kind of run you through it really quickly. So the costs on the left side are one-time expenditures. It doesn't necessarily mean they have to be done the day that we take over maintenance of Franklin Street. It just means that these are things that would probably be done once and then not necessarily have to be done many times over again, certainly not annually. So again, resurfacing to reduce the crown of the street would be about 825 grand. They strongly recommend a geotechnical analysis and a drainage system assessment to see kind of what is the current state of the street, and that will inform what improvements we need to make. And then our best guess for the stormwater system replacement and upgrade to fix the problems that we know it has is about $1.8 million. And again, that's what we know. It's possible that there are other things that we don't know, and possible that the assessments will find that maybe the system's not in a bad shape as we think, but this is just our best guess today. And then thinking about annual costs, the general street maintenance will be around $75,000. That will be lower right after the street is resurfaced because the brand new blacktop won't need to be maintained as much, but that'll go up year over year as that blacktop, as the asphalt ages. Traffic signal maintenance, as I mentioned, we would be taking that over, looking at about $27,000 a year. The additional pavement marking we'd be taking on about $6,000, and then the stormwater maintenance would be around $82,000, and that includes an additional crew member. The stormwater team really feels like they need an additional person to take care of such a complicated space as the Franklin Street top. And just a note here, I know Amy will appreciate this comment, but a funding source has not been identified for this. It's all kind of hypothetical at this point. This is what it could cost. So that's something to keep in mind. All right, so here are some options that we're asking council to consider today. The first option is what would it look like if we took over maintenance of Franklin Street? What would be kind of the next steps? There's kind of two scenarios that we could do. Scenario A is we allow, or we continue with the plan of NCDOT resurfacing the street. They're already planning to do it. They already have a contractor lined up. They pay for it, even though we would have to kick in some of that extra money, like Bergen said, to make it exactly what we want, or I should say, to make the pavement markings that we're looking for. But NCDOT would resurface in the summer of this year, because now we're in 2022. A way that we could move forward if we take over maintenance of the street, but after DOT resurfaces, is to conduct a public input process to see what the community wants on Franklin Street. So, what would be the ultimate future of Franklin Street? We could ask the community that. We would leave the temporary walkway until the summer, until the resurfacing. And then the ADA accessible multi-use path wouldn't be possible in that scenario, at least in the short term, because the way that DOT resurfaces would not be conducive to that ADA accessible walkway. The other scenario, if we do move forward with taking over maintenance, but we decide to have DOT not resurface so that we could potentially resurface and make the street more level, for example, this is what that would look like. So the town would pay for all improvements. which are not insignificant. We also could potentially have to pay a contract cancellation fee because DOT would be rescinding that part of the contract from the resurfacing contractor, so not ideal. But the town could again conduct that public input process to see what we want on Franklin. The temporary walkway could stay until we resurface. Again, if we were controlling the street, we would have a lot more control over that walkway, of course. And then the multi-use path is a little more possible because we could decide how we resurface the street and could consider the multi-use path. Our second option is if we stay with the maintenance with DOT like we have today. Our recommendation is to allow NCDOT obviously to resurface the street. We would need to submit our pavement, our restriping plan to DOT, the two options that Bergen showed you earlier with the different bike lanes. We need to submit that to DOT by March. And then we would have to contribute some funds towards improvements to make those pavement marking plans possible. So that's the kind of scenario if we keep maintenance with DOT and kind of the current maintenance arrangement. So that is the end of our presentation. And I'll ask Bergen if I missed anything or open it up to questions. Oh, perfect.
Thank you, Bergen and Sarah. We really appreciate your work on that. I'm going to ask a quick question before I open it up. If for option 2, would we be able to change the design from the traffic running to curb running in either one? If we have DOT do the resurfacing, would we be able, is there time before that to change the design?
I think there is time. It would be tight. And we would need not just that $250,000, but we'd need additional funds to re-engage the design consultant, which we wouldn't need for the traffic running because that was the plan. We don't have engineering drawings of the curb running bike lanes. That was a concept when we kind of discarded it back a couple of years ago. But I think we could do it.
It's doable. Okay, thank you. Okay, so this is a work session, just to remind folks, at business meetings, we do questions, then we do comments. I think we can mix it up since it's a work session and it's a little more informal. So I will call on you. You can do your questions, your comments, everything with the goal of giving staff clear guidance on our options. I have no idea who raised their hand first. I saw Amy, then Adam, were you raising your hand? Or you just have your pen? Yeah, okay. Amy, then Adam, then Jess, and we'll go from there.
Thank you. My first question is the ADA accessibility issue. Is it because of the side slope? Is that the problem? Okay.
Yeah,
I have seen pictures of communities that have used decking to kind of correct that without recrowning. Was that something anybody has considered?
So yes, and we've had that idea thrown out for specific areas, like at this restaurant, we could use that, but decking about 0.7 miles worth of multi-use path. We didn't look into that. I assume it would be quite expensive because it would be a lot of linear feet of decking in order to make the entire length of, the study area to be compliant. Was that what you had in mind?
Yeah. Okay. No, I just want to comment on that. And I'm assuming that if money is no option, right? Which of course isn't true. If we did that, then would that mean that we would have to have, what would that do to the bike lanes?
If we did decking or some other sort of multi-use path there, I don't think there's room for both.
Then there's not room for both.
Unless we took away the parking, which I guess is an option.
Gotcha. Okay. So I'm having a little bit of an issue with how the costs are getting shared out here. So in our council questions, we asked, and DOT is now responsible for maintaining the stormwater infrastructure under the street, and they're happy to give us crummy stormwater to maintain, but not willing to participate in that. So I know DOT is very powerful, but they are not unreasonable. So I'm hoping that we can push a little harder there and maybe get some help from some folks in pushing there. They must have a budget for stormwater maintenance, and maybe that's something they could transfer to us, or we could get part of that. It just seems that maybe their first answer isn't one that I think we should push harder on that. I think that would make sense. So would there be any savings if we recrown while DOT is resurfacing? Or are they just not willing to do that?
I asked that exact question yesterday, sort of looking at it like a betterment, like we do with some of our projects. Excuse me. And I think, myself included, it seems like something that would be a lot easier than I think in reality it is. Like, oh, well, you just, you grind up the road, we come in and we level it out.
Grind it up more.
It, right? I did talk with Chuck yesterday about that. And he said, that's not just a scope creep, that's a scope jump. And if we were wanting to consider doing something like that, they would need to cancel the contract with the existing contractor for this summer and work with us to redo that. And then that was in one of the slides about possibly having contract cancellation claims and losses as a result of that would be something that we could face. I think we could look in, it's not off the table, but it would be a totally different. I
mean, it just seems to make sense where they're doing work and add a little more work. It's better than doing it and then ripping it all up.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, I appreciate that. So just the comments on the bike lanes. I talked to some folks in the biking community. They really like the curb running lanes. Just if we can keep the cars from parking there and if we can keep them maintained so they're safe. Another concern is as we plan, I really want to think about the entire streetscape. Where we're to talk about how we maintain our street trees, how we get the wider sidewalks we need, how we really do placemaking and not just bike lanes and not just walkways, but really think about it as a whole. I'm excited about the idea of taking it over from DOT. I think that would be a good idea, just because we can really make big changes to our downtown. I don't know if folks who went on, there was a chamber trip a good while ago down to Greenville, South Carolina, and they had done some really nice things in their downtown with streetscape and really made it a great place. So I'm in favor of trying to do that. And I think, I think those are my comments. Thank you.
I think Adam was next.
I think Jess was actually ahead of me, but I'm happy either way. Okay.
Go ahead.
So just to be clear, we're talking the street narrowing to 2 lanes in whatever scenario from Columbia West to Merritt Mill, not it's 4 lanes all the way from Raleigh to Columbia.
Correct. So the distinction here is that DOT already resurfaced East Franklin Street. They did that in 2019. And so our opportunity on West Franklin Street is because DOT's already resurfacing as part of their normal maintenance schedule. And so that gives us the opportunity to consider a restriping of it in a way that it's not constructed today. I would also add that, the 100 block of East Franklin has challenges that the rest of Franklin doesn't have, just with numerous customers of the curb. So we have opportunities in West Franklin Street we don't necessarily have on the 100 block of East Franklin.
Yeah, no, with the pandemic, I've heard a lot of traffic concerns from folks. So yes, I'm sure you all have too. So, so my other question is, I know you all addressed this in the somewhat in the council questions, but there are lanes on Rosemary. There's been a lot of planning about biking on Rosemary. Is there any idea that putting these, whether we do curb lanes or traffic running lanes, would affect the general design of how we do our biking in Rosemary? Because I'll say, I think as someone who's ridden here quite a bit, I would almost always ride on Rosemary unless I have to go somewhere on Franklin. So
I think that's a good distinguishing comment there, that we haven't thought through, I mean, I think the first idea is to decide what we want to do on Franklin. And if and when we get bike lanes on Franklin, we can do an assessment of Cameron, Franklin, and Rosemary and see if that's how we want to keep it or what the best situation is out there. But I think that you are right in that perhaps Cameron and Rosemary might be more through routes, whereas if you're going to ride your bike on Franklin, you have a destination that's on Franklin, and we don't want to necessarily preclude that, because I do see bikes on Franklin now, and in fact, a lot of them that are probably visiting the restaurants and the shops there.
Yeah, if you need to go downtown, it'd be nice to have more through connections between Rosemary and Franklin too. That might be, that'd be a good way to get people over as well. Okay, so then final question. So the curb running, we have to come up with another 250,000. I will say, like, I think the curb running, in my view, and in, you know, a lot of the people who ride view, is much better design than the street running. The street running is, you know, hope that somebody doesn't swerve into your lane or is double parked there or whatever. But so it's $250,000 more for the planning if we're, or is it, I'm sorry. So yeah, let me know what's the.
Yeah, sorry. And I know we threw a lot of numbers at you tonight, so good job keeping up at all. So the 250,000 is needed regardless. And that's because the bike lanes are a totally new addition to Franklin Street. We need 250 for signal changes and for that Merritt Mill traffic island adjustment. And that's kind of regardless of which bike lane option we go with. If we do the curb running, it's going to be additional money on top of that because we haven't designed it yet. We're going to have to pay a consultant to help us with the design.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll just make my final comment is that I think I do worry about taking over the maintenance. I mean, putting us on the hook for several $1 million when we have millions of dollars of maintenance that we've deferred in our park system and elsewhere, I think is something we really need to consider, because it's a giant, big expense. And if we can't maintain the stuff we have now, taking on more maintenance, I think we need to think twice about that. But I think I would favor more the curb running. If we do that, I would also want to make sure that this doesn't affect the other bike lanes that we have. But thanks, appreciate that presentation.
Thanks. Jess.
Yeah, thank you. So I think, like, big picture for me is I really think that us taking over Franklin Street is important and well worthwhile for the future vision we want and have for downtown. So I think if we want downtown to be that place, I think, Sarah, you were talking about this in your presentation about being that destination. That's not possible. Like the placemaking that we want to do is not possible with DOT continuing to own the road. So I think big picture, I really think it's critical. If we are serious about investing in downtown, then I think that's the direction we need to go. I'm not as, to me, the curb running lanes sound better, but this just is not my area. So, and I don't feel like maybe that's the thing that I need to think about right this moment, but if you tell me otherwise, I can, give you an opinion. But I think I really would like for us to see if we can get DOT to hand the road over to us in better shape than maybe they would like to. That if, because to me, if stormwater hasn't been dealt with, then it's not really an expense we're taking on, and it's an expense that was there anyway. So if they weren't doing the work that's supposed to be done, and we would be on the hook for it anyway, then to me, that doesn't really feel like a new expense. That just feels like something that is going to have to be dealt with one way or the other. So I would really like to see if we could get DOT to hand the road over in the shape that it should be in. So if there's maintenance that hasn't taken place for many years, then I would love to see what could be done to get them to do part of it, or to do at least a cost sharing agreement with us of some sort. But I think, to me, big picture, the downtown that we want really does entail, the outdoor dining and the placemaking and the streetscape and all the things that I think, some of the things that people have really loved during COVID, which will go away in some ways. So I'm a big fan of us taking over, but I also would like us to really work hard and negotiate for some kind of better condition taking over.
Thanks, Jess. Michael.
You. Yeah, I second what Jess has said in terms of, I think if we, the kind of downtown we want and what Amy, referred to, because I, saw Greenville and saw what can be done, and it was quite special. So I think that, it's not a question of if we take over the maintenance, it's sort of how and under what conditions. And I think that, I would hope that since it looks like by taking it over, we're going to be assuming, nearly, if the numbers are correct, nearly $200,000 a year in maintenance costs, that perhaps, we could negotiate getting some of that money back from DOT, because we're saving them presumably a similar amount of money. So, like, hey, why don't you pay us in advance for the first 5 years that you're not, so we can use that for stormwater and some of the other things. I think we do have somewhat of a negotiating position here, and maybe we can't make it happen, but certainly, I wouldn't throw my hands up and say, nope. I'd like to hear actually from Bergen or Sarah or, somebody more knowledgeable than I about, the curb running lanes intuitively seem better to me. Certainly it's safer. And I know that, in the bicycle community, we often talk about, we want to make bicycling, available or safe for people from 8 to 80. And clearly, Franklin Street, can be a challenge at times. So I think I would prefer curb, but I'd really like to hear from our staff what they think the better option is of those two, because they are, I believe, far more expert than I am.
So I figured this question would probably come up when I did some thinking about it. I think generally I'm a big proponent of curb running, physically protected bike lanes. I think they're much better. They're going to attract more and wider array of cyclists, which is something that we want, of course. I have a few concerns about that design on Franklin Street specifically. And that's primarily due to the number of driveways and the number of intersections. I think it can be done. We'd have to work hard and work quickly with a consultant to get the plans for them. If you all are fine with losing parking spaces on Franklin Street, I am too. That's not one of my main concerns. I think the visibility of bicyclists, making sure that cars pulling out of driveways can see them coming, that the right hook isn't the cars turning right in front of bikes that maybe they can't see as well because they're behind parked cars. Getting bikes from the bike lane to turn left if they wanted to can be a challenge that I think it can be overcome for sure. Would be easier to overcome if we maintain the street than if DOT did, because there are no bike signals in North Carolina, so we can't have one, but maybe we could if it was our own street. Or the two-phase turns where you go and you cross over and then you go straight through the light. So there are options. It's not impossible. It's just a little bit more difficult to navigate if you're even a newer cyclist. But despite those concerns, I think it's something that could be great on Franklin and doable. I think one other thing, I think that I did say it, maybe I didn't say it loud enough or clear enough, or maybe I didn't say it at all, is DOT has not approved that design yet. So there is, if we are not going to take over the street, there is still the possibility that DOT wouldn't approve curb running bike lanes, just so that's front and center right there.
Okay, well, that's very helpful. So thank you for that, Bergen. And I suppose if, we started down the path of trying to design the bike lane, the curb running bike lanes, and somewhere down the, along the path, we discovered there was something popping up that just wasn't going to make it work. We could always revert to the traffic running lanes, or, so we can still make that March deadline, which sounds fairly set in stone.
If DOT is going to resurface this summer, it's not a deadline if we don't want them to do that.
But I kind of think we do. Well, thank you. And Just one last question about the stormwater. You've talked, how, you have the number of roughly 1.8 million for addressing stormwater. Obviously, hasn't been addressed yet. How critical is that? Is that an expense that we would likely need to take on in a year, in 5 years? Do we have some sense of what the time horizon is for that kind of expenditure?
Yeah, I asked a similar question in response to some of the questions we got before tonight to our Public Works Assistant Director, and his thought is, next 5 years, it needs to be part of the 5-year budget pretty quickly. That was his kind of overall feeling, is that if we do take this over, that those changes are probably in a 5-year horizon and no more.
And if we didn't take it over, hypothetically, would we expect that DOT would make those repairs in 5 years?
That's a complicated question. We haven't asked them. I think the short answer is that they don't see the same challenges on Franklin Street that we do. They maintain thousands of miles of street lanes throughout the state. So they're not looking at Franklin Street the same way that we look at one of our treasured town streets. So their prioritization is a little different than ours, to be as tactful as possible. To my knowledge, and Bergen, let me know if I'm incorrect, but they don't have plans to upgrade any part of the stormwater infrastructure anytime soon.
And sorry to keep adding on, but we also presumably have stormwater infrastructure on East Franklin. And what kind of shape is that in? And is that something that somehow needs to factor into this?
So Public Works, actually, the stormwater and all the numbers, all the cost numbers that we showed you on that slide with the 2 columns, that is the entire length that we're proposing to take over. So Raleigh Road to Merritt Mill.
Okay.
So are you thinking about the rest of East Franklin all the way down to 15501, for example?
No, just the length of, yeah.
That's included in the 1.8 million for stormwater.
So it's not just West Franklin, that's the entirety.
Yeah,
Great.
I realize it's a little confusing because we've talked about West Franklin only in other ones, but Raleigh Road to Merritt Mill is that 1.8 million for anticipated stormwater improvements.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thanks. Other council members who haven't commented, do you have anything? Camille, please go ahead.
Thank you. Okay. Do you have a question, or I have a few questions here. Resurfacing the crown and leveling, making it more level, how will that impact stormwater runoff on Franklin Street?
That is a great question. And I'm looking, there's so many people on the call. I can't quite see if Chris Roberts is here. He's our town engineer. He is. Hey, Chris.
Good evening. Great question, and thank you. So the crown, the way it's currently situated, is so steep that stormwater runoff works great with it, but it can actually lose some of that to be able to still function adequately. So it could be lowered and still work okay.
Okay, all right, that was a concern. What if we weren't to take over? If we weren't to take over maintenance this year? When is our next window of opportunity?
It's a great question. The analogy that our DOT rep likes to use is that, what can he do to get us to take over Franklin Street? DOT would love for us to take over Franklin Street. I think we could come to them any day of any year and say, we want Franklin Street. And they'd be like, sure, here you are. The window right now is them resurfacing, but absent of that decision-making at any time. Bergen, would you agree with that assessment from Chuck?
Yeah, used car salesman. He always pretends to put his jacket on whenever we talk about it.
So yeah, I mean, that decision is not necessarily pending. The big decision and kind of the window right now is because the resurfacing is imminent.
Okay, so help me out here, because there was a lot of information. You gave it to us ahead of time, but I'm still struggling. With the resurfacing, we have the opportunity to influence the design. But if we have not reached our design, if we have not resolved that, then, okay. This is my stream of consciousness. I'm still formulating the question. I'm wondering, are we putting ourselves under unnecessary stress trying to do this? Or do you really think that we can get this design achieved if we wanted to do the curb running bike lane?
I think we can. So I'm thinking back to 2020, and we, all three of the years, 2020, 2021, and now we've been in the same like last few, it's like, oh, we have a whole another year to do it. And then we find ourselves in the last 3 months.
Okay.
So we did it in 2020, and that was starting from scratch. We did it, I think we really kicked off the contract with our consultant in January of that year and made the DOT deadline just to find them delaying the project. So I think it can be done. And I think in terms of it, I know you're saying stream of consciousness, but I thought I picked up maybe on a little something that, you know, with DOT resurfacing, are we going to sort of shoot ourselves in the foot by choosing something to try to meet that deadline? Maybe that we're not, like, isn't the ultimate goal.
Yes.
And I think, you know, we've talked a lot about that. And I think that probably goes along with your, what is the timeline for taking over the street? That I think if we do have DOT resurface this summer and put in bike lanes or not put in bike lanes, whatever we decide, there is still time in the next few years, next 2 years, 5 years, whatever we want, to come up with what we really want Franklin Street to look like and do it right. And we may need to end up resurfacing the road again to put in those changes if we want to change the crown, but we have an opportunity to upgrade the road now and then do it again down the road, I think is probably what I would say to that.
Two more offerings I'd like to submit. One, I have talked with folks and then had the benefit of attending the Planning Commission meeting last night, at which time John Reese, who's a well-known biker in our community, said that he had some material that he could share with the planning commissioners, and I requested a copy of it as well. And one of the things that I didn't hear, or you may have said it, but I want to underscore it, there's overwhelming support for the curb running, and that's what I'm hearing tonight from others who have contributed. But in addition to the disadvantages of hard to keep it clean because it's going to require special attention to get to that lane, and the conflicts of the cross streets and the driveways, there's also the markings or the barriers between the parked cars and the bike lane. And we'll probably want to think about, I would like to hear considerations that you have for how you're going to do that. Is it going to be movable? You know, can you put them there and then remove them if we want to do something, or will they be permanent, or what? But how are we going to protect our bikers there? Because there still is concern, especially when people are not, and there was something in here, I'm looking at the notes that he shared, when folks, drivers are confused as to where the street parking is, and we want to make sure that they can't. If we do the curb bike lane, making sure that we prevent as much as possible from the drivers entering those lanes. So that I would like to share, that I received that information. And then I would like to hear just a little bit more about one or two examples of innovative concepts that have not been approved by the state that we've not been able to take advantage of.
I'll go first. So a couple examples that come to mind. One idea as part of the Downtown Together, specifically the Adopt a Block part of the Downtown Together project that Doug Rothwell and I think the Chancellor were both really excited about, were painting these giant tar heels on the street, and like either in a crosswalk or something like that. And DOT took about 30 seconds to tell me no for that. They really don't like any kind of non-white and yellow painting to go on the asphalt. That's an example that comes to mind. Pretty much the most innovative or interesting crosswalk they're really willing to do is the stamped brick design that we have at the Porthole Alley mid-block crossing on the 100 block of East Franklin. That's pretty much as exciting as they're willing to go. So that's an example we've had that comes to mind. They won't do any kind of colorful crosswalk, that type of thing. I believe we also asked them about doing like large planters at some intersections to reduce the crossing distance, or at least the visual crossing distance for pedestrians, and they weren't excited about that either. So those are a couple examples from the last couple of years that come to mind.
Thanks so much. And that concludes for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Camille. Anyone else before we wrap up this item? We've got 3 more to go. Ty, go ahead.
Thank you. I won't repeat anything. So I'll just say I agree with my colleagues about excitement over taking over Franklin. I do support the curb running, but with the, I guess, anecdotes that other people have mentioned about the sightlines and such. And I also do agree with the need to coordinate our vision for Rosemary and Franklin going forward. So if we do put the bike lanes on Franklin, how does that impact Rosemary, and specifically that downtown partnership petition regarding the loading zones, I think is a big item that's kind of left out there in the ether. And yeah, I also agree that we need to push NCDOT a little harder on the cost sharing up front, since we are taking quite a bit of maintenance cost off of their hands. Other than that, yeah, great work. Thanks, staff.
Great, thanks. Paris, did you want to comment? And it's okay if you don't, just want to make sure you have the opportunity.
Great, thanks, Karen. Yeah, like Ty, I'm not going to repeat everything. I'm also in favor in the takeover of Franklin. I'm also excited about what that means for our community, especially our business community, and also pushing forward our vision and future for the town and Franklin Street. Like the idea of the curb running, like Ty mentioned, the sideline, the sight lines are also something that I'm very concerned about. But you know, I feel like we have the right plan and design that we can overcome some of those potential obstacles. And we've got an Amber Alert. Sorry about that. Also, as others have mentioned, really pushing back on NCDOT about the stormwater maintenance. I think we need to really have some conversations about that. Other than that, yeah, I think this is a great opportunity and an opportunity for us to get a portion of our plans done on this stretch. So looking forward to moving forward with that. Thank you.
Great. Amy, did you have a quick comment?
Oh, I'm sorry. I know I'm not allowed to double dip. I'll be very fast. I just want to say, I know that I asked this question and it kind of, the response went over. I didn't process it fully, but putting the bike lanes in, we're going to be losing our extended sidewalks. And I know COVID's not going away anytime soon. So, and I know how important those have been to the merchants and everybody downtown. So I just feel like that's something we haven't really talked about yet and considered in this bigger discussion. So I don't know if the downtown partnership has weighed in as we proceed with this, but with COVID and all, I mean, is this something that we want to plan for at some point? But the idea of coming in this summer and taking all that infrastructure out from our downtown, I just worry about the implications for the businesses. So I'm sorry that took me a while to connect those dots.
Just maybe a point of clarification. So regardless, it will have to come out when DOT resurfaces, because they can't resurface around the structures. So that's gonna kind of have to come out regardless, and so unless the town takes over maintenance of Franklin Street and tells DOT not to resurface.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks everyone. I am not going to repeat. I pretty much agree with most of what's been said. I think what I have heard is that there's a lot of support for taking the road over and trying to get DOT to take care of their portion, especially the stormwater, and turn it over to us in better condition. And that the curb running seems to be the majority interest. Does that give you what you need from us for this item?
I think what I'm hearing is we should proceed with a design consultant to design the curb running bike lanes. If for some reason that doesn't work out, we can check back in. But that's the desire of the council, and we will have DOT resurface this summer and then explore what that means to take over the road after that happens, or simultaneously, but we do want them to resurface, and our desire is to have curb running bike lanes if they can happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's right.
Okay.
All right. Thank you
you
so much. Appreciate your work on this. Very exciting. All righty. That takes us to our next agenda item, which is focus on the appropriation of excess funds from the 2021 fiscal year. And how great is it that we have excess funds from fiscal year 2021? Not many towns can say that, I would think. I'll turn it over to Amy. Thanks.
Does that look good to everyone? Okay. Well, good evening, Mayor and Council, Mayor Pro Tem and Council. My name is Amy Oland, and I am the Director of Business Management. I am here tonight and will be presenting along with Town Manager Maurice Jones to follow up on the presentation from December 1st, where we provided an update on the fiscal year 2021 audit results, and to provide a summary of general fund results and a recommended plan for the fiscal year 2021 excess fund balance appropriation. The presentation is 8 slides long and should last about 10 to 15 minutes. So the town had an incredibly strong fiscal year 21 that we attribute to several things. First being very conservative budgeting practices. The town was very conservative going into the fiscal year 21 budget, as we recognized that there were numerous factors that we did not know how the pandemic would impact. Second is unexpected sales tax growth. When we were preparing the budget, all information that was out there for us stated that there would be on average a 5% decline from prior year sales tax revenues. However, we actually saw a 15.7% increase over the prior year sales tax collections. And lastly, personnel savings from the hiring freeze. After the pandemic hit, we implemented a hiring freeze to try and curtail spending. And we had a process where we were reviewing positions that departments were recommending to be hired. And so that helped us yield additional savings. Typically, we see about $2 to $3 million per year in personnel savings, which is about 10% of the town's full-time positions, about 60 to 70 positions, which are vacant due to just natural attrition from turnover, retirements, and things of that nature. However, as a result of the hiring freeze, we had $5.9 million in personnel savings. So overall, our fund balance is up by $7,028,454, bringing total fund balance for the general fund at the end of fiscal year 21 to $34.3 million. Available fund balance, which I'll define on the next slide, is up by $5.9 million, bringing it to $21 million. And the amount of fund balance that we have available to appropriate is $7.9 million. So a lot of complicated terms that we're talking about here. So try and give a little bit of context for some of this. So unassigned fund balance, we were talking about are funds that remain available for appropriation by council after all commitments that we have for future expenditures, all required reserves that are defined by our state statutes, and any previous designations set aside for those funds have been calculated. So the town defines these remaining amounts as available fund balance. The town strives to maintain a targeted unassigned fund balance which is defined by the Governmental Accounting Standards Board at the close of each fiscal year equal to 22% of total general fund expenditures. And that also includes transfers to other funds. To determine the amount of available fund balance, we take our unassigned fund balance at June 30th, which was $20,989,439, and divide it by the general fund total expenditures for the year, which was $59,376,447. And that gets us to the 35.3%, or the $7.9 million. To determine that actual amount, we take what we've calculated at the 35%, which is the $20,989,439, and we subtract out what we would have calculated at that 22% target that we tried to achieve, which is $13,062,819, and that gets us that $7.9 million that's available to appropriate. So as council considers how much of this fund balance to actually appropriate, there's some important factors that I'd like you to consider. So as we talk about fiscal year 21 was a little bit unique in several areas as a result of the pandemic. We, going into 2021, made some budget cuts to try and be responsive to several unknowns related to our revenue projections. So we had $2.2 million that we cut from the fiscal year 21 budget in the areas of maintenance, pay-go capital, vehicles, and our other post-employment benefits liability pre-funding. We had the hiring freeze, which allotted an additional $2.5 million over what our normal personnel savings are. So those are dollars that we need to take into account that aren't what we would normally see in a regular year. And so we just want to keep that in mind. So right now it's up to council to determine how much fund balance you'd like to appropriate, but staff recommendation would be to reduce the amount to appropriate from what's available of 7.9 million to 4.5 million to help us ensure that we end fiscal year 22 at or just above that 22% general fund balance target. So just to kind of walk you quickly through how we came up with that 4.5 million. We look at the numerator of that equation. So I took the fiscal year 21 unassigned fund balance amount, which is 21 million, and subtracted out what I'm recommending for the fund balance appropriation of 4.5 million. So using that 4.5 million, it would bring us down to 16.5 million. And for the denominator of the equation, I took the fiscal year 22 general fund budget, which was 71 million, reduced it by what we would typically see in a regular year. That's $5 million. Those are savings we typically see as a result of, as I mentioned, just personnel turnover, expenditures that we have planned but don't actually happen in the current year. And so some of those dollars carry forward to the next year in terms of the timing of when projects are carried out. I added the carry forward, as I just mentioned. We always have some dollars that carry to the next year for projects that are ongoing, and that's typically around $2 million. And then added that 4.5 million that we would plan to use if we allocated the $4.5 million. So what we would anticipate seeing our total expenditures for fiscal year 22 would be 72.5 million. So we would take what we would have for the numerator, which would be the amount that would be remaining of unassigned fund balance. That's 16.5 million, divided by what we think fiscal year 22 expenditures would be, which is 72.5 million. And that gets us at 22.8%, which is right around that 22% target. So as I mentioned earlier, we first introduced this topic to council at the December 1st work session. As we consider potential uses for these funds, we definitely want to make sure that we consider those needs that were identified in the 5-year budget strategy, which was also presented to council at the December 1st work session. This could include one-time funding that would provide council with the ability to address council and community interests in areas such as climate action or affordable housing, organizational needs, things that we've talked to council about for the last several years that we know have significant funding gaps, such as maintenance, pay-go capital, vehicle replacements, and then recovery and restoration from the pandemic, We did have those budget cuts that were made to help the budget, and we have to consider the impact of those cuts on the backlog of identified needs that were addressed earlier. And now I'm going to turn the presentation over to Maurice to walk you through one recommendation that we had and for council to be able to respond to some of the things that we are proposing.
Thank you, Amy. On this slide, council, you'll see, as Amy mentioned, one proposal that we've put out there to council to consider that would help us allocate the $4.5 million in excess fund balance. This is meant to simply tee up the discussion based on what some of the town's identified needs are in the areas that the council and the community have expressed a deep interest in. So we are proposing the possibility of using $500,000 for climate action projects. Climate action is critically important to our community. The council approved a climate action plan last year, and we've put a significant amount of money into our budget to begin addressing our needs, and we're doing that pretty significantly in this fiscal year. But we do have some projects that could be helped with this $500,000 to help us move forward with our goal of doing everything we can to combat climate change here in Chapel Hill. We have about $500,000 proposed for affordable housing projects. We have various projects that are in need of some funding that could help us move our goals along when it comes to enhancing and increasing affordable housing and providing support for folks in our community. $500,000 towards the compensation and classification study implementation. We talked to council a little bit about that in the past. We will be having a deep dive with council next Wednesday about where we are, and this $500,000 would help us address the findings of the compensation study, and then also help us address compression issues associated with being responsive to that study. We also are proposing about $500,000 towards building maintenance. As we've mentioned a couple of times to council, numerous times to council, we have fallen behind in our building maintenance. We have reduced that over the years when the budgets have been tight, and we believe that it's time for us to take a step forward in addressing some of those needs that we have. We do have about $1 million towards vehicle replacement. We have deferred a lot of that replacement, and we're starting to feel that with our vehicles throughout the town. And so we believe $1 million would be a good step in the right direction to address the $5 million backlog that we have in our vehicle replacements. Another $500,000 towards improving streets here in Chapel Hill. That is another area that we have fallen behind on. We've talked to council about that, I believe, in every budget season since I've been here, is our need to reinvest in streets. And then we have about $500,000 that could be utilized to address one-time budget adds for our departments. They've been looking at different issues, and we've had to delay investing in some of those needs that we have within our departments because of our budget. And then another $500,000 we put in there as a placeholder to possibly be responsive to council's interest in a splash pad. As you may recall, council formed a committee a work group to take a look at the need for a splash pad here in Chapel Hill, or several splash pads here in Chapel Hill. And so we put $500,000 as a placeholder there until a decision is made about moving forward and how we would move forward with splash pads in the future. So our goal for this evening was to discuss this scenario with council and seek your guidance on next steps, including whether council would like the staff to develop an engagement process for this funding, where you believe that we should be possibly investing more and less. And so we wanted just to tee up this conversation and help get some guidance from you as we look to move forward with utilizing this funding. With that, we will stop and take your questions and comments.
Thanks, Maurice. And before I open it up, can you clarify, obviously we're not going to make final decisions on this tonight. What's kind of the timeline for making that decision?
We really don't have a timeline, but when we talked to council back in December about this, we had a brief discussion about maybe wanting to do this a little bit faster than what we were talking about with the ARPA funding. There was a pretty in-depth engagement process that we've worked on and that we've started now with ARPA over the course of the next few months, with the goal of bringing some recommendations back to council later on this year in May and June for decisions. And when we talked a little bit about that with council, there seemed to be interest in doing things a little bit faster with this funding. And so we don't really have a timeline just yet. We'd like to be able to move sooner rather than later to try to address some of these needs that we have, because we have been delaying them for quite some time, especially when it comes to maintenance. And we do need to make a decision fairly soon about the compensation and classification funding as well. We will have that discussion with council next week with the hope of coming back at the end of January for a final decision there. So that's probably the one area where we do have a bit of a timeline that we'd like to keep if possible. But the other funding that we have, we could take some time on if council desires to do so.
Okay, thanks. Comments and questions? I see Amy.
Thank you. So first of all, I'd just like to say thank you to Amy and to Maurice and to everybody on the staff who kept us in such great shape during such difficult times. You did an amazing job. So thank you all for that. Just want to recognize all your hard work. So I think my primary interest in the savings is first having it because we cut back to be conservative and to be cautious. I think my first interest is in using this money to make up for things that we had to cut in those times. So there's lots of good projects on here. I'm a big, obviously, want to be funding all the climate change and affordable housing and community benefits that we can. But I think that especially because this money is partially a result of all the cuts that we had to make, I really would like to see most of it go back to do that. I don't feel like it's found money. I feel like it's kind of money we borrowed from the past and we need to be paying it back. On the compensation and classification, I agree with you on the importance of doing that. I think that's one of the more important things we're going to be doing in the next year or couple of years. My only concern is using money from a one-time windfall to be funding an ongoing expense with salaries. So there's people who know more about finance than I do, but we need to be prepared to make sure that anything we do here, we're not scrambling to find money every year, right? We need to be building that into the structure of the way the town does business. So
absolutely. Can I comment on that real quick? Because that's a great point. And we've had that discussion. We'll have that discussion with you all next week as well about what this means in terms of future funding, for instance, in fiscal year 23. So that will be part of that conversation that we have with you all. We fully understand that any decision that we make about salary and benefits will have to be paid for in the future.
Yeah, and I just think, especially in the new labor environment that we find ourselves in, and our commitment to service, and the amount of our budget that does go to people, I think we're going to have to kind of wrap our minds around maybe a new way of thinking about money and how we structure things. So. I guess my last comment is I know that in the council questions, there were a lot of questions about having a public process around this. I think I'm very glad that we're doing a robust process around the ARPA money. I think in this case, I think we're elected to be that community voice sometimes, and I'm comfortable handling this money as a council matter. Thank you.
Paris, I think you're next.
Great, thank you. I have a question regarding our public housing and the backlog on maintenance and repair. These are units that we control as a town, and I'd like to know what that backlog looks like. What are some of the general repairs and maintenance that needs to take place? I know that we haven't been able to do much due to the pandemic. And so folks have been going without, and these are some of our most vulnerable community members. And so I want to know what that backlog looks like and how far back it goes. and if that $500,000 could be increased to address that backlog and maintenance needs.
We can certainly provide that list of deferred maintenance that we have for you prior to returning to discuss this issue for sure.
I see Michael.
Thank you. And I'll second what Amy said about, thanking Maurice and Amy and everybody for leaving us in this good position. And I'll sort of raise you one, which is I also want to thank the staff who actually were the folks on the ground who were sort of the beneficiaries of the cutbacks in spending and who had to do more with less. So at the end of the day, I appreciate Maurice and Amy's leadership, and I really appreciate our staff's willing to go along and do the hard work of doing more with less during COVID. So I want to make sure the whole staff gets thanked.
Thank you.
The other thing I wanted to ask is, can the funds that we now have, find ourselves with, can they only be used for things within the general fund, or can they be used in for expenses in various enterprise funds? For example, I have a bias toward transit for obvious reasons. And I know that, we're looking at trying to find money for bonuses and, recruitment incentives to help keep our staff, our transit staff intact. And can we use these funds for those kinds of needs, or do the funds have to be used only within the general fund expenditures?
So typically how an enterprise fund works is that the revenues that are generated by the enterprise fund pay for the expenditures. So that's our general practice. And to have a healthy and vibrant enterprise fund, you would hope that that would be able to happen. The general fund can pay for anything technically. So it's just a matter of what council chooses. We typically don't recommend that if there are other funding sources, because we are so limited in the funding sources that are available to fund our general services. So yes, we can, but I would just caution that we think through to see if there are other sources for transit or housing first before looking to the general fund.
And I would add that I believe that transit has a number of different sources that they could tap into right now. We've been having discussions with Brian Litchfield and the leadership there about tapping into some of those other sources in order to fund some of the things that you just mentioned, Councilmember Parker, about recruitment and retention efforts.
Great. And one last question, there's a lot of money, 500, working off of memory, 500,000 for climate action, a number of other sort of round numbers in there. Are there sort of tentative budgets behind those numbers, or are those really very much kind of placeholders? And then we would go actually figure out how to spend it? Because for example, it's not clear to me how we would use 500,000 on climate action in the next 6 months or a year, but maybe, that data may exist. So I'd like to understand, are we starting with money and then figuring out how to spend it, or do we know what we want to spend it on and these are the numbers that result?
Well, it was a little of both, and Amy can talk to you a little bit about that. But some of these are based on estimates that we've received on a number of different projects. We did go back out, and I think Amy can talk a little bit more about this, but did approach the department heads about these areas that we're talking about right now. We've highlighted and asked for some ideas, and so that did help shape those round numbers that we came up with. But once again, we do know some of those are estimates as well. Amy, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, no, I think, we talked to our departments as we were putting this together. We were really trying to figure out one recommendation that we could put before council so that we could receive your feedback and see what you support, what you would like us to change. And so we talked to departments about what are your top priorities that connect to the 5-year budget strategy that we put forward. What are your top priorities in these areas and how would you spend? So we do have lists we did round numbers, for clean estimates here. We do have
Yeah,
lists of projects that we would come back before council. If these are areas that you support, we would come back with more detail about what would be included in those categories.
Yeah, I always get concerned when there's money lying around trying to figure out how to be spent.
Me too.
That often doesn't go well.
And by the time, once we get a sense of where council is, we would come back to you and talk about specific projects before decisions have to be made too.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Sure.
Any other comments? I suggest.
Thanks. I just want to echo that. I think what I'd really like to see us do is focus on the areas we cut. I think that's a really well put kind of priority, that to really figure out where are the places that we've kind of been starving our departments or initiatives and kind of prioritize it that way and go from there. I think that would be, I guess, easier for me to understand or to figure out how to approach this, because right now it feels a little, I guess I'm not really sure how to engage with it, because it's $500,000, like and they all sound good, but I just don't know. I'm not sure I know how to be helpful without a little more in terms of really prioritizing or figuring out what are the initiatives that we need to refund, since we did rightfully so, and absolute thank you, as others have said, but I think we just need to think about it from that angle. So that would be helpful for me for future discussions. Thanks.
Thank you.
I see Ty, then Camille, then Adam.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll echo the thanks from everyone else. Very appreciative of y'all's leadership throughout these hard times to put us in the position that we're at. And I'll also agree about using these funds to essentially plug holes or things that we decreased, deferred maintenance, et cetera. And I will also definitely agree with Councilmember Miller-Fushi about the public housing deferred maintenance. I know even before COVID, we have deferred a lot of essential maintenance on our public housing. So that seems like a key area that we could be putting these funds towards. And yeah, I think that was the biggest thing I wanted to add.
Thank you.
Thanks. Camille?
Thank you. And also thank you to you all for managing these funds so well. I have to echo along with what others have said about putting the money back where it was taken from, where it was held in reserve from. And I want to be explicit here. I would like to see the splash pad not be included as a use for these funds. We have been very cautious in spending, and I cannot see, it just doesn't feel that there's integrity there to then put it towards that when we have some needs that need to be addressed that we put on hold. The less sexy, the maintenance, as you said, we really need to address. And that's also the maintenance of the housing and streets. I would also like to have more, just as Councilmember Jess Anderson said, more guidance. What funding sources, well, in particular, ARPA, what could ARPA cover that, or could not, that this could? What would be the benefit of using this funding source as opposed to another? So that would be an additional consideration I would like to have. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks. Adam, I think you were next.
Yeah, and Chair Segment, I don't know if I have one or two ideas, but I did take a couple photos last night that might be helpful. And would you mind if I shared my screen and showed those?
Okay.
Okay, all right. So no, I totally agree with the focus on plugging some of the holes and some of the deferred maintenance that we haven't done. And it just so happens that I was picking up my my son at the skate park last night, and I was allowed up there because there were not many other kids around. And I did actually take a couple photos of some deferred maintenance that we need to do. So I'll just show you a few of those. Let's see. Here we go. So there are 12 lights at the skate park. They are all out except for 2 of them. There are just 2. So that's certainly some maintenance that needs to be done. The wood is rotting away. This is where kids are, every day. It's one of the more popular parks in town. So we're actually, this is just completely rotting. You can see it's all slippery. There's actually nail holes coming up there, and the rot down here is, coming when either you're riding or you're a biker coming on that stuff. So, we clearly have a lot of, that's just one project. I don't mean to single it out. I happened to be there last night, and but boy, we have a lot of needs like that, and I would support focusing on those needs first, and especially the ones that have safety concerns. So thanks.
Yeah, that's a very good point, and we've had that discussion with council about the needs that we have in parks and recreation. And in fact, last year, when council approved the 2/3 bonds, a significant portion of that went to streets, and then also to addressing some of those long-term needs on the park side. So, but we have many more needs there, as we've discussed with council when it comes to the 5-year budget strategy as well.
Jess, I saw your hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly say, I know Councilmember Berry asked that the splash pad be removed. I don't know. I know that our Parks and Rec has been starved for a long time, and I don't necessarily have an opinion about this funding source versus another for the splash pad, but I think that the previous council as well, as the community, has been really clear about the interest and the need. And I don't want us to not do the splash pad. I think we do focus on a lot of things, and we do a lot of things well. So it doesn't mean that we're not doing the other parts, or that we don't. We do invest a huge amount of money in housing, in transit, in a lot of things. And I think we do need to prioritize the splash pad given the community interest and the trajectory that we've been put on. But if that needs to come from a different funding source, I don't have a particular heartburn, but I don't want us to lose momentum on something that I think is about people who don't have memberships to fancy country clubs. We're talking about also doing upgrades to AD Clark Pool at Hargraves, and making sure that this is very accessible, as well as making sure that we have a lot of diversity and different perspectives as we talk about the splash pad. So I just don't want us to lose momentum or get off course there.
Thanks for that. I'm going to try and move us along. We've got 2 more pretty significant items to go tonight. But Camille, do you have a super quick? Okay.
I do. Thank you, because I'd love to respond to Councilmember Anderson. It was not my comment meant to take the splash pad out of consideration for us to pursue. It was not using these funds. I would not feel good about us using these funds that were saved because we didn't fund necessary items. So that's what I'm addressing. If this is the only funding source that money could come from, I'm happy to consider. And that was another question that I did have. Thank you.
In terms of, so it's kind of complicated. That $500,000 that we put in, we very specifically said that was a placeholder for a couple of reasons. One, we're not even sure what type of splash pad we want to do just yet, or if we're going to do a number of splash pads. The discussion that we've had with the council was, do we want to have a destination splash pad, or a couple of smaller neighborhood splash pads, or all of the above? And if we were to go that route, it would cost us could cost us anywhere between $1 million and $1.5 million. So that 500,000 wouldn't get us there. We'd have to find other sources anyways in order to make that happen. ARPA funding we may be able to use ARPA funding depending on where those splash pads are. It will be much easier for us to do like some of the smaller splash pads if they're in particular census tracts when it comes to ARPA, for instance. The larger destination splash pad, once again, it depends on where that's located if council goes in that direction. So ARPA is certainly an opportunity for us. And then there's always our capital fund as well. But as we've said to council, it's been pretty strained in recent years. And so we'd have to have a discussion about, priorities there as well. So we do have some other options to consider, but once again, that will be dependent on what direction we want to take when it comes to the splash pads. I hope that's helpful.
All right, I'm gonna wrap this item up. I'm gonna add just my own comments just to say that I think that we've asked our staff and the public to go without and to kind of the whole do more with less. And I think we've paid a price for that, and our staff have certainly paid a price for that. There's only so many times you can do that. And we don't want to make that the new normal of our staffing level and the workload. That's just not sustainable. So we need to restore positions. We need to take care of, our parks and our town in ways that, maintenance and housing and, the things that the town is responsible for, the quality of services and structures. I'm of the opinion that that's got to come first. There's something else I wanted to say. And I also think with some of these, there's ways that we can meet multiple goals, and with climate action, if we purchase electric vehicles and hybrid vehicles, that's going to help us with our climate plan. If we replace light bulbs with LED bulbs, especially ones that are out, that will help our parks and our climate. So I think there are ways to meet some of these goals simultaneously. That's the word I want. Okay, do you have what you need from us?
That was very helpful. Thank you, council.
Great. Thank you so much. And we are on to our next item, the long-term planning with, I don't know who's leading this.
I'll kick it off and then hand it over to Mr. Stevens. The purpose of this item is to share a long-range planning initiative update with the council. This resulted from the housing needs study discussion that council had last year. And our goal is for council to potentially discuss interest in a council-led community engagement process for this visioning effort. And the town, as I just mentioned, Mr. Rod Stevens is here. We've hired Mr. Stevens to help us scope out the initiative and choose a consultant that would assist in leading this long-range initiative. Mr. Stevens conducted the research and provided the results of the housing study that council discussed several months ago. As a result of his findings and recommendations, council has instructed us to move forward with this initiative. And Mr. Stevens is here tonight to provide an overview of his work and to take any questions that you may have. So I will turn it over to Mr. Stevens. Is Mr. Stevens there? No, he was there earlier.
I don't see him on the panelist list. Can anyone text him?
Yeah, he said he was on the call a while ago. See if I hear back from him. But if you'd like, I can walk through some elements of the scope of the work that Mr. Stevens will be doing for us.
Yeah, that would be great. And I know people have questions, so maybe we can
Sure.
just keep moving and hope he pops back up.
So Business Street, which is the business that Mr. Stevens is part of, will have three primary tasks to help prepare for and host community meetings, and also help us with bringing forth a consultant to help lead this effort. He said he will be back on shortly, as the text message I just got. So he will be preparing a technical analysis of where and how the town can grow, expanding the circle of public involvement to include underrepresented groups as part of our engagement with that, organizing community meetings, including logistics, training the hosts, and summarizing the findings. So Mr. Stevens feels we can get the scoping done by February, and then begin the work. We will be working on pulling together an RFP or an RFQ. We haven't decided on which vehicle to use just yet, to engage consultants who will bring their ideas to us about how they could help us lead this process, and then we would go from there. One of the questions that has been raised by council members is how best to move forward with an engagement process, what that would look like. There's been a proposal to have a council-led engagement process, and we wanted to answer, have your questions answered on that tonight, or your thoughts reported on that tonight, to help us decide how best to move forward with that, as we're thinking about bringing in a consultant to assist there. There's Mr. Stevens. He's popped up.
Yep. Hello, everybody.
Hi.
Welcome, Mr. Stevens.
Hey, Karen.
So Rod, did you want to walk through, I touched on the kind of high level, touched on the work that you'll be doing as part of the scope. Did you want to go a little further in detail on that, and then talk about the timeline?
I think I'm just going to recap for a minute. Hold on, let me get the faces up so I can see the group here. Just going to recap a little bit the context from back in September and November. I promise not to take a lot of time, but I think the basic presentation in September said your housing needs for the next 20 years are going to be 35% more per year. You need to produce 35% more housing over the next 20 years than you have over the last 10 years. And that most of your remaining capacity in Chapel Hill is in multifamily land, that you have kind of a missing middle, not only of densities, but of different types of households whose needs are not being met and their voices really aren't being heard at the table. And that there's sort of three options that the town could pursue. One of those is to just decide to be a no growth community, in which case you have the highest ratio of jobs to housing in the region, and your prices will continue to grow much higher than the rest of the region. You become more like a Palo Alto-like place. The second option is really to grow compactly and sustainably with comprehensively planned neighborhoods that link housing and jobs and services together, and do those in a walkable fashion such that a fair portion of those can be owner occupied. And then the third option, I believe, is really just to continue going as you can be, but I think your prices will continue to go up with that option, and you'll lose some of your sense of place. So to me, the third option of not changing your course is really in some ways the worst. What I've suggested to the council is that in order to grow sensibly and environmentally and in a way that's in character, you're really going to have to change where and how you grow. And you really need to understand comprehensively, where can you meet your housing needs over the next 20 years? And from what I can tell, that hasn't been looked at really in past planning, and maybe I'm wrong on that, but that would be the point. So going forward, really to do a fast and just enough process that would, over the next 3 to 6 months, would put options out on the table for you to have a community conversation and build consensus for which of these options do you want to pursue. Status quo, no growth, or smart growth. And I think in order to get ready for that, what I've suggested is really kind of a smart and just enough process, really two strands of that. One of them is a technical analysis. It looks comprehensively at your community and puts everything on the map in terms of options. It doesn't say this is how you have to do it, but says these are your options for growth and options for doing it in a smart growth way. And so that's a technical analysis. And then second and concurrent with that is a public outreach, what I call expanding the circles of involvement, where you identify the leaders and groups that are not being heard in your current process, because your current process seems to be dominated by a lot of people who are opposing growth. Not everybody, but you have a lot of people arguing for the status quo right now. But you are not representing and including people who may be commuting in from other places, older senior citizens who can't find housing to scale down to. There's a variety of groups out there. And so reaching out and finding those people takes some time. And I would suggest that it's sort of two-pronged process: the technical analysis for where and how to grow, and then the second, the citizen involvement process, be carried out simultaneously. That second citizen involvement process would also say, how can we set up a community dialogue, a series of workshops at the end of this to bring options to the table for citizens, to bring that information before you start it and give it out, but also how do you hold those dialogues such that you can have a real face-to-face dialogue with the community over these issues of where and how do we grow. And I think that those dialogues, if they're well structured, could be carried out in a couple of months, but that would be really the phase two part of the citizen involvement strategy of both reaching out and designing that process so that it is efficient and it's real and it's involving people. So what I'm suggesting is a three-part process. One is a scoping strategy, which is what I've given you guys a proposal for now, to spend 4 to 6 weeks reaching out to the best and the brightest, both in the technical side and the citizen involvement, and say, if the goal is informed citizen workshops, what do we need to do and what can we do over a couple of months to get ready for those? And so the scoping work would identify one, on the technical side, what's the work product, what needs to be done for it, what are the skills of the consultants that need to be brought in, and what's the work process. And the same thing on the citizen involvement side of what kind of skills do we need, what kind of work do they need to do, what's it going to cost. And so what I would do at the end of the scoping phase, and I'm calling this all planning to plan, but what I would do at the end of the scoping phase in say 4 to 6 weeks is to come back to you all and say, here's a process that leads to community dialogue. And this is what we think it will cost. This is what we think the work products will be. This is what we think it will take in terms of time and money. And this is where you could be in 6 months from now. And at that time, you would make the decision of, do we go forward with this or not? But it's essentially a front-end investment in time and money and outcomes to say, what would it cost to do it right and to do it quickly? So that kind of wraps it up, Maurice.
Thank you, Rod. Questions or thoughts for Rod?
Comments, questions? I know you have them. I see
Good.
Amy, then Jess.
Yeah, hi, Rod. Thank you for coming tonight. We appreciate that. So I just, Karen, we're doing questions and comments now? Not all in one, okay. My first question from Rod is that you were talking about the kind of the second phase is a technical analysis. In that phase, would you be looking more closely at some of the data? I know that at an earlier session, we talked about the Triangle Council government data that you had used, and you said that you hadn't vetted it. It was just the data that was available at the time. So would it be digging deeper into those kinds of numbers to come up with more specific and more solid data?
Yeah, we'd want to go back, and because when I did this analysis last spring, your COG had the existing data from your projections 5 years ago, and they were preparing a new round. So that that's where the capacity analysis comes out. So we'd want to go back and see what updated projections they have for your overall housing needs. But more particularly, most of the analysis would focus on Chapel Hill itself. And we'd put every square inch of the city on the table, everything from Blue Hill to your commercial boulevards, to your existing neighborhoods, to your large greenfield tracts, and say, using best practices, what's your capacity in each of these areas for building out housing in the future? And that's to my knowledge, that hasn't been done. You've done a lot of planning, but I'm not sure that you've actually looked at your capacity overall. And that's the central point of this, is to say, if you want to create new walkable neighborhoods, where and how can you meet those targets? And we can express those as a range, because it may be that it's very easy to hit those targets, or it may be that it's very hard to hit those targets. And it's a political trade-off at the end of the day. So we can say, in order to produce this much housing, here are different options, but we can also express this as a range to say, here's the band of outcome that we think you want to get towards, and what are the best ways. But at the end of the day, this is really a dialogue with your community about, does your community buy in the different approaches?
Yeah, no, I agree. Thank you. And I don't think we've done planning like this. I've been involved in Chapel Hill planning for almost 20 years now. And we tend to take a much more, really focused on the ground. We're going to look at this area and that area and that area and silo it, instead of saying, what's the overall picture? How can we, what are all of our options? What are all the places we can do these things? Where can we meet these needs the best? So I am extremely excited about planning in this way, I think, and actually being able to go to our community and present them with trade-offs, instead of just saying, let's just have a visioning process and tell us, and dream with us, which is wonderful, except then there are realities, So I think that it's really important to be grounding these discussions in the realities and an understanding of what one direction over another will actually mean for folks. So I am super excited. So I guess my second comment is for staff, and this connects with the next item on our agenda. I'm really concerned at how this process and the LUMO process are going to dovetail. I was very disappointed that after council petitioning last September to kind of get started, that we're still not there yet. I think that given the timing that Rod has just laid out, I think it's going to be very difficult to fold his work into the beginning part of what the staff is planning for the LUMO rewrite in any meaningful direction. I think we're going to have two things kind of going off in their own directions. Ideally, I think I would have Rod's work come, and then we take over with our other consultants, and then we start doing the more detailed, smaller scale things that it's my impression that you're talking about for those processes. So I'm very concerned about the timing and how we're going to make all these.
Sure. We've had a lot of discussions about that, and how do you have these two efforts going on at the same time on parallel tracks, and then having them meet up. And so we have had some good discussions about how to make that happen later on this year. So we believe that we can continue along on those two different paths, and then have them converge once we're ready to do that.
Yeah, I remain very concerned that that's not possible or effective. And I think that's a big problem. So my other thing is, I know, Maurice, you were talking about this as a council-led community engagement process, and obviously the community engagement is central to what's going on here. But one of the things that we've lacked in our earlier planning processes were having some of the hard discussions and hard decisions. 2020 had a lot of input, had thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of hours, it felt like, of discussion and planning and workshops and all that kind of thing. And in the end, we produced a document that sort of had everything in it. And as a result, didn't really make any decisions and didn't really set any policy. So I think there's two important areas that we have an opportunity now to, as we're going to redo this LUMO, we need to look at how we administer development, who makes decisions, what kind of process it takes, how long things takes, how we incent certain things. And we're also going to have to look at the actual planning, which is what Rod is talking about. What place do we want to become? How do we make sure these LUMA ordinances are possible? So while the public processes will inform those, at some point, there's going to be policy decisions that will need to be made. Those policy decisions have to be made in the council. Unless we're going to I don't see a place where we open up the community to a vote on that. I think that the buck stops with us on that. So I just want to make sure that I think part of council's interest in making sure that Rod gets the time and resources he needs to work is that I think that his work is the thing that's going to help us make those good policy decisions. So I will stop there. Thank you. I'm really happy that we're having this discussion. I'm really happy that this kind of planning is an option on the table. I think it's a huge deal for the town.
Thanks, Jess.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. So I will not repeat. I do think that we have avoided these conversations, even with our future land use map. There was a piece that was missing at the beginning, which was this. And I don't want us to make that mistake again. And I have been, I think, very open and transparent about my very adamant support for this and just how important it is. Not that we predetermine the outcome, but that we do this process and we do authentic engagement and we do it well so that we set ourselves up for success for what is going to be a hugely time intensive and expensive undertaking in the LUMA rewrite. I'm just really disappointed that 8 out of 9 council members petitioned in September to get phase 1 started. And that, as far as I can tell, based on the answers I was able to get today, there is still not a contract in place for phase 1. So that I find a little bit shocking, honestly. But I do think, regardless, we need to move forward with this work, and this needs to inform the next phase. And we can't. The buck does need to stop with council. We're the people who have been elected to talk to the community about the big picture, vision, and we can't shy away from that conversation. And we can't do justice to the work or to what the community needs from us without doing that. So I am incredibly in favor of this work, and I think it needs to start yesterday.
Councilmember Anderson, did you want to talk a little bit more about the council-led approach that you had suggested?
That it wasn't my idea. I just think it's the right way to go. I think that we are accountable and answerable to the community. And I think in terms of big picture vision and policy making, that's our job. I would love to see us talk less about specific bike racks and do our policy job. So I think in terms of, and not that I'm dissing anyone who's talked about bike racks, because we all do it, but just that we need to move in a different direction. So I think, I've talked to my colleagues and heard concerns about, but how do we know if it's just one council member, how that will go? I think we can double up. I don't think, I think that that Mr. Stevens has talked about a quick and effective and excellent process where we don't have to do a million of these. I think it's not going to be a huge lift in terms of the number, but I do think we have to be well prepared with our consultant. I think they need to be facilitated so that it's not that the council members are in charge of facilitating the conversations, but they're there engaging with the public and listening and hearing. And I also think they really need to be scoped well so that we have those trade-offs, so that we don't ask people, what do you want? And then we come back and say, well, that wasn't possible. So of course we didn't do what you wanted. So I think we need to have be able to really give people those clear choices so that we're giving them a fair and authentic conversation with their elected officials, which then informs the next phase of work. I don't know if that answers your question or if there's more you wanted. And Rod, you're welcome to jump in since this really wasn't my idea. It's just something that I'm really in favor of.
Yeah, just from a staff standpoint, it'd be helpful to have an understanding of where council stands as a body. on that. So we can build that into the work that Rod's doing, and then also working with the consultant to come aboard.
Yeah, I'll just dive in for a second on the citizen participation. I think the person that would be brought in the second phase, the planning to plan on the expanding the circles of involvement and preparing for that. One, they need to meet with the community and figure out who those leaders are and what the dialogue is, the vocabulary is for the dialogue. But second, they'll need to meet with the council and the elected officials to figure out what roles you guys are comfortable with, what sort of support you need, and in terms of those community dialogues, how they're structured so that you all feel comfortable participating in that as much or as little as you want. But we're talking about really new ground here.
I'm sorry, there was one more issue that wasn't brought up already. Karen, I'm sorry. Just the issue about the council subcommittee. I know that was something that there have been some various opinions on, so I just didn't want to not have that question asked, but I don't need to talk about it right now.
That's actually exactly what I was about to bring up.
Oh, yay, never mind then.
Well done. This idea of a subcommittee has been kind of floated, and I think it's not the same thing, Jess, as what you were just describing, and Rod, of council members being involved in these, the outreach and the community meetings, which I think is a great idea. And I think that Ms. Fisk would probably welcome it. But then there's this other thing about a subcommittee, and Rod, are you recommending that as well? Or are you seeing that as connected?
I think that it's going to be necessary, and I think it needs to be a small and active participation, but I would recommend holding off on that until we finish the scoping, because you all are going to have to commit to this process first. And so you don't want to form a subcommittee for something you haven't committed to first.
That makes a lot of sense. And that will give us more time, I think, to talk about what it is. And
yeah. Until we know more about what it is, it doesn't make sense to form a subcommittee to manage an unknown. So
agreed. Let's put that off till another night. Michael.
Yeah, thank you. And I just want to basically second what Amy and Jess have said. I think this is important work. And I know Amy and I have discussed many times the shortcomings of Chapel Hill 2020 and what it didn't say and what it didn't decide. So I think that we need to do much better than hard choices do have to be made. I think we can't promise everything to everybody and then wonder why not some significant fraction of the people feel like they didn't get what they were promised. Number one, I think that, moving forward with this, I think the data analysis, it's sort of a technical question, Rod. There's been, when we did the flume, we kind of purposefully excluded single family neighborhoods, and we basically looked virtually entirely at the future focus areas and then downtown, unless you consider that a future focus area. And it seems to me that if we're trying to understand what our future housing capacity is and how we can grow and where we grow, we can't exclude any part of the town, but we have to look at the totality. And so I was wondering, in terms of your technical analysis, do you see it as being that wide ranging?
Yes, absolutely, Michael. It has to be everything on the table. And in part, you put stuff on the table so you can take it off. But you have to put everything on the table, and then you have to put reasonable expectations against each of those options.
I completely agree with that. And I think, we have to get to a level of detail that maybe we haven't gotten to in the past. I know that, prior to my joining the council, the council made some changes to facilitate the development of ADUs in town. And it turns out that was, way less impactful than I think a lot of people expected or hoped, partially because of the economics of building an ADU, partially because of the difficulties in financing the economics of building an ADU, but also critically because HOA rules supersede town zoning rules when in terms of being restrictive. And so there were lots of parts of town where HOA rules prohibited building ADUs or, doing other things. And so I think I'm hopeful that we can even get to that level of granularity. So when we try to do that future growth capacity, we're being very realistic about it and not, we'll change some zoning and magically wonderful things will happen while ignoring, the realities on the ground.
Michael, I think there's 2 points here to really focus on. One is, how does a person make quick calculations on the fly? And the second one is, what are the ground rules before you start modeling? Okay, and I forgot to mention the ground rules earlier because there are a variety of conditions in Chapel Hill that define what Chapel Hill is. And you guys have run across with things like the Oro site, where it wasn't really, to me, a question of density, but a question in some ways of the buffer on MLK. So I think this technical analysis, and this gets actually into the nitty gritty of how that will be carried out, but that has to start with some assumptions about rural buffers and some other character things that bound what the possibilities are so that it doesn't become, what's the option of turning Chapel Hill into Los Angeles? You want to avoid that. So that's scenario one. The second scenario is that I think,
and just for the record, I want to vote against Los Angeles.
Okay.
So there's no misunderstandings.
Okay. The second thing is, I think the second phase, and this is part of the reason for scoping carefully, is the second phase, if you get the right people on board who have enough experience, they've got the track record and the numbers in their head for saying, here's what I think will work in the next 20 years. Here are reasonable assumptions. So, everybody talks about accessory dwelling units. If you get the right people and they've been around, they'll know what percentage of a given neighborhood at a given socioeconomic level will build out with ADUs. So we don't have to do extensive market studies. We don't have to do pages and pages. If you get the right people, they'll have a lot of this in their head.
Great. So yeah, I think that, I'm really, and I also want, and maybe this will become more apparent to me at least, after we go through the next item on the agenda, in terms of the LUMO rewrite, because I remain confused, I guess is the best word, how this work will interdigitate with the LUMO. I mean, in some sense, it seems like maybe it's a prequel, but I'm not sure. And so I'd like to understand how these things fit. It seems like, on the other hand, that we're focusing, and maybe I'm incorrect here, but it seems like the focus of this, the work that you're proposing, is how and where do we build, good housing and good neighborhoods.
Yes,
and
exactly.
And so there are other elements to both our vision for the town, like where should our commercial centers be? Where do we envision office buildings? If we're, and if we build housing, does that mean we don't have land for office buildings? So I can imagine that there are other questions in terms of visioning for the LUMO that also need to be answered. And I think it's important that, once you've developed your scope over the next 4 to 6 weeks, that there really be some good dialogue between what you put together and our planning department and the consultants that the planning department either has or is about to engage to do the LUMO work, so that we have regardless of how many people are doing the work, we have an integrated, unified process that is efficient and that helps guide what I believe is the most important work that will happen during my tenure on the council, which is ultimately, doing this visioning and then coming up with a LUMO that makes it real.
So, Michael, let me touch on that briefly, because you're talking about the gorilla or the elephant in the room, whatever it is, which is how do you plan housing and neighborhoods in the abstract? And the answer is you don't. You have to plan them comprehensively. And so, what are the biggest challenges in your community? There's inclusivity, there's pricing, but there's also traffic, right? And so if you're going to talk about creating sustainable neighborhoods in a sustainable city, these options have to be tested for how do people get to work. And that's going to inevitably raise questions about what are transit options and other options for making these neighborhoods fit in. So, you know, the example that always comes to my mind in your city is the old Blue Cross Blue Shield site, where at one point you had a plan to run a light rail station through it, and that would have made transit housing possible. And the question now is, if you're not going to have light rail on that site, can you run a jitney bus or something? This options for housing processes has to be grounded in some reality about alternative transit and how you're going to connect the live work, how you're going to make the live work connection in the future. So we'll have to get into those questions, because we can't just say, oh, somehow people will get to work.
So anyway,
And similarly, we'll have to deal with the retail questions of where they're going to walk to coffee.
yeah, so I've probably talked too much already, but so I just, wanted to, and Karen's nodding, thank you for that support. But I think we need to get your work started. And I think, for me, at least, once you've scoped out and, put down on paper what you see the deliverables being, it will probably then help me at least understand much better how this all works together with the LUMA rewrite. Although, Colleen may have responses now, or perhaps wait till after we've heard the presentation on the LUMA rewrite and maybe loop back on this one. But thanks again, Rod, and thanks for being so available.
Sure.
Who's next? Oh. We're not there yet.
Sorry, yeah. Nope. Too soon.
I like it. Ty, did you want to comment?
Yeah, I just want to quickly make sure I also put in my voice to essentially second what everyone's been saying. The work that Rod is proposing is really important, and would like to see us move forward with that as soon as possible. And then, I also do have some questions that I'm sure staff is about to answer around how we're kind of coordinating that work with the LUMA rewrite and these other consultants and all that good stuff. So I will stop talking now and let staff do their thing.
Thanks, Ty. I want to offer a minute. Okay, Paris.
Yeah, really quick. I want to move forward as well. And as a newbie, my head is spinning. There are a lot of moving parts here, and I really do want to really see those connections of the work that Rod is proposing to do, and how that fits in with the rewrite. And so that's going to be so key for me, visual. So I would love to see if there could be something put together visually for folks like me. That's just how I learned. That would be really, really helpful. And just how those things are going to be, meshing, and just looking forward to it. I'm really excited about this. I am excited about how we are uplifting the need to really get all of our community's voices into it all. It's going to be so key. And the folks who are going to be facilitating this really needs to understand our community. Folks really need to understand the history of our community, the way in which our community has grown, why it has grown or not grown in the way that it has. It really is an equity issue for me. And so that's going to be really, really important as we're doing this work, making sure that folks who are driving these community conversations understand and are willing to have the hard conversations moving forward to get to where we want to be. I think it is important folks decide, do you want A, B, C, or D? Do you want the status quo? Do you want to move forward, or just stall? So thank you for that. Let's move forward.
Thanks. And I will just validate for the new folks. It's really challenging to come in the middle of things, and it's okay to not fully understand where we are at first. It takes a while, so don't feel like you have to. But Adam, did you want to comment?
Yeah, just super quick. I mean, I have listened to Rod even before I was on the council, so I appreciate your perspective. And I think to me, as we're talking about this process, one of the most important things is, when you're talking about the technical analysis to put all the options on the table, I think that's so important because we really don't want to we're going to ask a lot of people in our community to come to these meetings, to put their time in, put their effort in, and we really want them to, have those options, all the options and be able to make decisions, but that options that are actually on the table and not ones that aren't. So I think that's an important part of all this. So I appreciate the work and support that.
Camille, go ahead.
Thanks. Real quick, Rod, thank you for this. I'm going to echo what Adam just said and others have said, that this holistic look at our housing needs across the town is extremely important to all of us, but definitely to me, so that we are empowered as a town when we say, all right, developers, we want to work with you. This is our vision for what we want in this section. And I think that this work that you're proposing will enable us to be that, to do that, and to be that empowered. Right now, it strikes me that the town of Chapel Hill is being reactive, and I could be wrong, but I think this puts us in a much more proactive, where we have articulated what we want. And I'm looking forward to us getting started soon.
Thanks, Camille. I will wrap this up real quick. With my own comments, I agree with the comments that we want to move this forward and move forward quickly. I think, when I was campaigning this last time, I heard from a lot of folks, they just don't know where we're going. They don't have a sense of the vision that we're working towards. And so when we make decisions, they don't necessarily see where we're trying to go by making those individual decisions. So I'm really hopeful that this process will help us to really articulate a vision, a shared vision that we all can get behind and move forward towards in a clearer way. And I think, Rod, some of the things you're saying aren't new, but you've been able to say it in a way that is making it more clear, I think, the choices that we are facing and that they are fundamental and that they are urgent. We know there's a housing crisis. It's not just here, it's across the country. And we have to make decisions quickly or the decisions will be made for us. So I'm really excited about the perspective I think that you can bring. And I think you've heard from pretty much everyone that we want to move forward and move forward quickly. So it sounds like we're in a good place. I know we're going to keep talking with the next item related, but Maurice, do you have what you need on this?
Yeah, I think so. I'm not sure if we have clear guidance on the council-led approach just yet, but we can bring that back when Rod comes back in a few weeks and talk more about that.
Yeah, I think there's agreement on tabling that until we know what we might be leading.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Rod, for joining us. We appreciate it.
You're welcome. Take care.
Have a good night. All right, the next item is the LUMO rewrite process. And Colleen, it looks like you're gonna take this one.
Sure. So thank you, Madam Mayor Pro Tem and the council members. Thanks for moving the items around actually too. That was very helpful to hear, I think, for us. But also to be able to demonstrate how we do see these two initiatives working together. We've had some really productive conversations with Rod, and we're excited about the work that he's doing and trying to figure out together with him how to advance both of those initiatives together. We hear your concerns. We're trying to make sure that we can address those. So we'll try and communicate that in the presentation. But if you have questions, feel free to reach out and let us know. So for those of you who don't know, I'm Colleen Wilger. I'm the Director of Planning. With me tonight is sort of the lead team for the town, but also the consultants. So we wanted to introduce you to them. And we also wanted to give you an update about the transit-oriented development planning and the Unified Development Ordinance. And I'm just going to sort of say the Unified Development Ordinance, that was a way to sort of talk about the new code, but we use LUMO so interchangeably. We're so familiar with that. The Land Use Management Ordinance, it's the same thing. So you may hear us use that interchangeably. You may use it interchangeably. It's okay. We're all talking about the zoning ordinance. But the points for discussion today are really about doing an RFP recap, sort of where we are in that process. Like I said, introducing the team. We wanted to touch base on equity measures. We've talked about that as being a cornerstone for this initiative. Having an integrated approach with the transit-oriented development and the UDO, as well as the planning initiative, the planning to plan initiative. We can talk about that a little bit. Because there are 2 engagement projects going on, actually 3 now with the planning to plan initiative. We want to touch base about what that means. There is a planning engagement plan, a public engagement plan intended as a deliverable for the Federal Transit Authority grant that is funding the TOD work. And so that is a deliverable that is specifically identified. We'll talk about that. We'll share major milestones in the schedule with you and what that means for council involvement. And then we'll open it up for questions. We have about 24 slides, but we'll go quickly. We have about a 20-minute presentation. And so with me tonight are my counterpart, Brian Litchfield, who's the director of the transit department, as well as Corey Lyles, the planning manager for long range planning in the planning department. Matt Cecil, who is in the transit department, he's doing the lead work for the TOD. And then Deidre McIntyre, who's a new hire in the planning department. I don't know if you all met her yet. She's the principal planner. She'll be managing the LUMO rewrite. And so I'm happy to have her on the team.
So hi, hello to all the council members. Again, my name is Corey Lyles, and the last time we spoke with you all late summer, we were developing and getting ready to put out an RFP for this project. So we wanted to catch you up on what's been happening since then. We released that RFP in September, allowing a 30-day period to receive proposals. So they came in October. We reviewed those proposals and shortlisted the teams we wanted to interview. Among various qualifications, we looked at their experience with similar projects, their performance and track record on equity, the strength of their public engagement practices, all the things you'll be hearing about as we introduce the team. We also looked at participation of firms within these larger teams, including sub-consultants, where there was ownership by historically underrepresented groups such as women and people of color. And so we factored all of that into our selection process as we moved into interviews. Once we had a selection based on those criteria, we negotiated a scope of services and has spent the latter part of 2021 doing that to put it into as part of a contract with our top ranked firm, which we will introduce next.
So Skidmore, Orrington, Merrill has been an interdisciplinary team of architects, designers, engineers, and planners. They've been around for a while. They are an iconic group that is known for this type of work. Chris Hall is the urban strategy leader for SOM, and he'll introduce the rest of the team.
Great, thanks, Colleen. So joining me tonight is Doug Voigt with SOM. He's our global practice leader for planning and urban design. David Scully, who sits with Doug and myself in our Chicago office, and he's a leading urban designer and practitioner in urban communities. Cameron Barradale, who is actually based in our Charlotte office and will be working with us closely to ensure kind of local coordination. We're really lucky to be joined by Orion Planning, and Alison Malk is with us tonight. They are leading zoning and coding experts And then we also have been joined by Neighboring Concepts, a Charlotte-based design and planning practice who will be supporting us in the engagement process. SRF Engineering, who have been working with you on the North-South BRT process in various capacities. And then also we have SB Friedman, who are market analysts and have significant expertise around housing, economic development, funding, and implementation issues. The team we've brought together really, we were fascinated by the opportunity that Chapel Hill represents, as well as some of the challenges. And it's really interesting, some of the challenges that you've just been talking about in terms of being a growth community, but also the pressures and the challenges that that brings, particularly around providing appropriate forms of housing, meeting equity objectives, and having an integrated approach to transportation, economic development, housing, placemaking, and community services. So we saw that as a real opportunity. And I guess one of the things that we bring to this process is a really strong sense of collaboration and understanding that this is a very dynamic context and you have many studies and processes underway. So we really want to start this process by looking at how we collaborate with those ongoing processes. I'm going to hand over to Doug to talk about our approach to sustainability.
Yeah, Chris, thanks for the introduction. I think it's important to emphasize that we start every project by bringing together expertise from many disciplines so that we can holistically address sustainability at multiple scales. And this research around each of these topics provides to us and to also you and the communities in which we work a baseline in which to explore new possibilities, but also to improve outcomes around decarbonization, biodiversity, as well as ecological health, equity, and community well-being. So maybe go to the next slide. David?
Actually, is it Colleen? Are you covering this one?
Right. Sure. So for the equity measures, there were really three components that we've been trying to focus on. I think for a lot of people, equity is always sort of cordoned off into engagement, but we're trying to go above and beyond that. We really want to talk about it at a content level and what the outcomes are. And when we talk about outcomes, we will be doing sort of an audit of what has been done in the past, what's worked and what hasn't, but also with an implementation plan of moving forward. What are the outcomes for historically disadvantaged groups? The content, I think SOM will go through a little bit in more detail, but what we're trying to understand is with the different deliverables, how is equity embedded throughout all of them? I think a lot of newer planning initiatives, they have equity as a standalone document or methodology or some type of deliverable. We've chosen, and we've talked about this with council, we've chosen to embed it throughout. And so that's something that you will see every step of the way.
Awesome, thanks, Colleen. And I think to that point, sort of we as a team really see equity as, sort of part of every process. And our team understands the importance of addressing racial equity through a thoughtful engagement and intentional design that reflects the values and aspirations of the community. It's really important to understand that history in the context of the place and how vital they are to really finding the opportunities to create equitable, inclusive, and transformative visions that really support the entire community as a whole. Next slide. And I think you'll see, kind of with our experience and with the work that we do, that all gets weaved through every part of the process, including, sort of the work around transit-oriented development. So we put together this slide to really talk a little bit about what are some of the elements that really make up equitable transit-oriented development. And to the points made earlier, you see that they really run the gambit of every facet of the project, whether it's focused around transit and transportation and how to make sure that we're connecting to all elements of and all people in the community and making sure that that's connecting to those who need it most. looking at opportunities to really weave together the development as well, and how development and transit work collectively to address and engage community overall. And this requires really real engagement with communities to understand their needs and how we can really help to find and address those specific, sort of issues, whether that's retail gaps, whether that's sort of finding opportunities for community uses, supporting small businesses, or bringing housing that really, addresses needs and addresses the existing community so folks can have access to that housing, as well as supporting folks who are already there. So there's a real opportunity to really think holistically and bring new ways of design and new ways of of really imagining and creating outcomes that are both sort of maximizing the impacts of what the elements are, as well as supporting community needs in all facets. Next. I think I'll hand it to Doug.
Yeah, I think just a couple examples, because we've been very active, deeply exploring how these principles can be applied to real projects that we're currently involved with, and how they can have even greater positive impact on the residents and the communities in which we're doing these plans. This was an example, and as Colleen mentioned, this is in the city of Milwaukee on both the north and south sides, where a TOD-driven planning study was done in parallel with a anti-displacement effort to look and proactively address these issues, but also so that it was integrated throughout the entire planning process. And I think it's interesting to see how not only these priorities could achieve the needs of the surrounding community, but also address sort of the site-specific, the uniqueness of each neighborhood, so that the application of these planning principles, these priorities, these policies really help to improve the quality, the character of these existing places, while at the same time finding ways to test capacity for new housing and other uses. This is just an example of some of the measures that were put forward to drive greater equity and community investment through new policies and programs in Milwaukee. Chris?
Great. And a similar project, but in a very different context, was in Rochester, Minnesota, which is home to the Mayo Clinic. And maybe there are some parallels with Chapel Hill in the sense that it was a very high growth community anchored by a single institution, which had a very strong influence on both the history and the evolution of the community. And this was looking at what the potential is associated with a new bus rapid transit. This is where a very substantial part of the land capacity within the town, within the city, was actually would be provided. So the land supply was here, and we worked through a process to really understand and establish what the different capacities are across the town. What's the appropriate nature of development, scales and densities, forms, typologies across different segments of the corridor and in different locations, and at the same time had a very strong focus on equity considerations, which was around access to jobs, access to education, access to training, as well as considerations of affordable housing and considerations of how public sector land and Mayo Clinic land could contribute to achieving those objectives. So next. So if we go to the next slide.
And we wanted to note here that this council charged us with integrating two different projects, the planning for transit-oriented development along the BRT line, and then the vision for our new LUMO, or Unified Development Ordinance. We've crafted this RFP and selected the team with an eye towards combining and overlapping the work on those projects wherever possible. And you see here a scheme where really most of the work can have an eye towards both projects. starting with a planning foundation, inventory of the past work that's been done in the community, a joint baseline of technical analysis that supports both projects. They'll both have a lot of work around urban design vision, station areas for BRT, and then focus areas from the future land use map. In some cases, those geographically overlap, but not all cases, but we'll be using a similar approach to designing and doing physical planning for those areas. An impact assessment of costs and revenues to the town that considers the development in all of those combined areas, and a series of implementation tools that look at how to implement the vision that comes out of both projects and considering where those tools will be the same. You'll see in the middle there, bottom section, one area where some work around the UDO sort of breaks out from being combined with the TOD project. And that's because we will be looking town-wide when we consider a new ordinance. And so we'll need to have considerations for areas outside of station areas and focus areas, including established neighborhoods. We'll be looking at and engaging with the public around what they want in those areas, how to enhance neighborhoods and what regulatory tools get us there. And missing middle is a big focus of that specific UDO vision component, although missing middle housing will show up in other parts of the project as well.
So like we said earlier, there will be a public engagement plan and we will be bringing that to council shortly. The principles that we have in place are sort of more than the check the box type of engagement. We're really looking at incorporating multiple types of events and input opportunities. We're trying to broaden the voice and sort of bring in the people who have not been sort of the traditional stakeholders. The goal for this is really relationship building with underrepresented groups. I think part of the equity piece is trying to make the material accessible. Zoning is very technical and wonky. And so trying to make sure that everyone understands so they can enter the conversation at a level playing field will definitely be a key component of it. We will be using the community connection strategy, which has been put forward by our Affordable Housing and Community Connections Department. And those guiding principles around joint design for what the engagement looks like and how and who and where we meet people where they are, transparency and reciprocity. There will be as much listening as there will be facilitation, and then having compassion and equity in those conversations and how we receive the feedback and incorporate it and put it into action with the outcomes.
So good evening, everybody. I am Eric Orozco with Neighboring Concepts. We are a minority-owned architecture planning firm who has been tasked to implement the consultant team's role for public engagement. I'll be joined with my colleague, Julia Taylor, who actually grew up in Chapel Hill. So you will be getting very familiar with both of us if you aren't already. So based on the charge of the community connection strategy that Colleen just mentioned, we need to really create a public and stakeholder engagement plan that puts a focus on engaging those who have been historically disengaged and disconnected from the town, especially with an emphasis on reaching those who are most impacted, historically marginalized populations in Chapel Hill. So with this purpose in mind, we have proposed a steering committee that will function as a sounding board and also shape processes of the planning effort. With what we call an in-reach function. So as opposed to a simple ambassadorship or, role or outreach role, we really want to make sure that the members of the committee are leaders shaping processes directly through their embedded roles with communities and target audiences for the plans, particularly so that station and focus areas visions can be integrated more intimately with the community initiatives and activities they are leading in those areas. So in other words, we want to build community ownership through the plan. So our process, what does that look like? As you see here, we'll have the traditional open houses and public workshops, understanding though that we are dealing in the era of COVID variants. So, health authority permitted, we will have in-person workshops, but we'll also diversify that engagement with online webinar style events. And see if this is, yes, we'll also initiate actually with site tours, hopefully conducted by community organizations themselves. And we'll see here the schedule. So it's broken up into 3 rounds, a visioning a round of open houses in April. So here's where we'll be listening and really looking deeply at the history of communities and the things that have impacted them. The second round will be really the bread and butter input. So here we'll focus on really polling the community. What we like about it is it falls in June. So it's an opportunity to tie into Juneteenth, for example, activities and community discussions. So we really are hoping to really work with community organizations to really get us access into those activities. And then finally, we'll conclude in October with the coming, together with the visions, wrapping those up with community input. And next slide. So alongside the 3 rounds of open houses, we'll also have pop-up events going out into the outdoor festival, street festivals, and also conduct meetings with community organizations, meeting them in their spaces where they meet. And of course, we'll also be running a project website with online tools.
I was running the slideshow and forgot to unmute. So good evening, everyone. So these are our major milestones for the project. We'll start with our public engagement plan. We'll move into our technical studies. Our technical studies are just that. They are very in-depth technical studies. We can give you a list of what that looks like if you would need more information on that. We will go into our station area concepts, our implementation plan, our final result report, and then our UDO visioning reports. The word visioning on this can be a little misleading because I do want to emphasize that all of this actually works towards the next phase of this for the UDO process, which is the actual rewriting of the LUMO. So all of these works will work toward that next phase. So I did want to emphasize that. And then we've talked about town and council engagement before, but we really want to kind of settle on this slide and have a conversation with you guys because we know we're going to need your input and your engagement from the beginning of this process. What this looks like is really up to you. How do you want to be engaged? And that engagement is beyond just beyond the 3 open houses that we've identified, but also communications. How do you guys want to be communicated with, and what does that look like? As a part of this, we do have some work sessions and some regular meetings identified that align with the open houses and some of these larger public engagement components. To have follow-up conversations with you as a council on your input and what you thought, what you got from those sessions, but also as a briefing of some of the deliverables that are coming up. There's also an educational component to this, not only to the community, but also to the council, as well as our other advisory boards and committees. So that's also integrated as a part of engagement.
So that concludes our slideshow. We do have a few items for discussion. I did want to mention, the schedule for council engagement. The way that can work with the planning to plan, the Rod Stevens work, can be changed depending on what that looks like. When we spoke with Rod last, he had thought his work would kick off in April, which is why we had that sort of first open house. We thought we could do some of those discussions together, and so to avoid public input fatigue, but we can work with him on that. The same goes for that sort of that middle milestone that Eric talked about around the open houses in June, we said, if his work is gonna, sort of come to a tail end in June, July, let's try and figure out what that inflection point looks like again. And so we can modify that and work together with him. Same goes for the technical studies. I think he'll be doing technical work up front. So will we. So we'll be looking at some of the same issues together so that, we're informing each other and advancing the collective work. So those are just two examples of how we can sort of merge the multiple initiatives and make sure that we're on parallel tracks, but we're talking to each other the whole way and we're not overlapping or contradicting one another. But I think the council engagement, those 3 open houses are like the major milestones. We'll also be talking to you with facilitated discussions, some one-on-ones like Eric and Chris said. And so there are other opportunities for you. We will be looking to engage with community partners. We've talked a lot with Shanika and with others about how do we use and leverage community partners that have been underrepresented. Like we said, relationship building is a goal here. And so that is something that we want to look to council, but also to others to figure out who to bring into the fold and to hear from. And then most importantly, we want to talk about the live issues. I think one of the most exciting things that is coming out of the Rod Stevens planning to plan work is that we are looking at townwide goals and townwide issues, which was not necessarily the case with the flume. So that opens up a lot of opportunity. And so if there are other issues like that that you would like for us to focus on, we're open to hearing that. So I will just share that with you and then open it up for discussion and questions. And so Deidre, I don't know if you want to stop sharing the screen so we can see everyone, if that's helpful, Karen.
Yeah, that would be great. Thanks.
Okay, thanks.
Give me 1 second. I'm trying to figure out which button to press.
All right, thanks for that presentation. And looking at council, I see Jess Anderson.
I have a lot of thoughts, but I just wanted to start off with a question, which is, I just need some help understanding what the product is. Like what do we hold in our hand at the end, or what?
No, that's a great question. There will be multiple technical studies, but the goal is really some station area concept plans and then some focus area plans. And that is looking at what was sort of not discussed in the future land use map for those specific geographies. What does the land use look like there? And what does the build form look like? Chris, I don't know if you want to embellish on that.
Yeah, sure. I think what's really important here is the work will build on previous work, but take it to a much more significant stage of resolution in terms of understanding what the nature of development will be within this BRT corridor, how available or potential sites could be used to meet different objectives over the next 5, 10, or 15 years. So that's a really kind of important piece of work for the transit corridor. But where these processes come together, the TOD and the UDO visioning, is the focus areas. And the focus areas overlap geographically, and then some of them stand outside as well. So across the station areas and the focus areas identified in the future land use map, we'll essentially be testing those capacities we were talking about earlier, but then also start to lay out design frameworks and forms which address street connections, bike connections, public realm connections, and then the nature of development across residential, retail, community service, employment realms to really develop a design vision and a physical vision of what these significant components of the future growth areas within Chapel Hill will actually look like, and then how they will resolve and address objectives around meeting housing growth targets, meeting equity targets, and meeting public realm and connectivity objectives. But the outcome will be you will get some very clear reports and very clear frameworks and images and directions and quantities and metrics around what the future growth will be within these areas.
And Well, I guess a couple things. So especially given our continued interest in this holistic view of the town, I'm wondering why we're still only doing the focus areas, given that we just in the previous presentation really talked about our need to look at the entirety in order to meet our goals and also to understand our actual capacity. How do we fill in those gaps then if we're still only focused on the focus areas?
No, that's a good question. So the areas that were not discussed in the future land use map in the last iteration, those are those single family zoning areas. And those are the areas that we've talked about, how do we infuse additional density? How do we add that missing middle housing, right? We've all talked about that. So some of that work will be done in that missing middle scan that we talked about with this initiative, and that will help inform how we address those densities and what those neighborhoods look like. And I think working again in tandem with Rod Stevens and the planning to plan work, I think that's going to help inform what that looks like. And so ultimately the goal is, yes, we'll have more information and more detail for the focus areas, but the real goal is to have more information for those other areas too, so that as that work with Rod Stevens and that missing middle scan is happening, they converge, and then we can take all of that and rewrite the code together. Does that make sense? I'm sorry, it's very technical at a late hour.
No, I think it does. It's just that given that the Rod Stevens work wasn't necessarily in place when this plan was coming together, I'm just wondering, like, without the Rod Stevens work, how does this make sense if we don't have that? But
it's in the missing middle scan, which is what we had scoped as part of this work. Yes.
Okay. And in terms of I think the other thing we've been talking about a lot is needing to really focus on trade-offs and also making sure that the council knows that the council is being given clear direction and given the opportunities when there's policy decisions to be made. And some of this is policy and some of it's not, as far as, in my understanding. So I'm wondering how we're going to go through this process, ensuring that we're giving realistic trade-offs to the public, and also that we're allowing council to kind of make those policy decisions in a just-in-time fashion, I guess, at the right time, and with the context that we need in order to make, or I guess the information we need in order to make good choices.
And Colleen, if I may, and that's a part of the discussion today. It's how, if you guys are part of the engagement, if you guys are a part of this process, right? It's not us asking you at the last minute to vote on something you aren't unaware of, right? It's asking, you will have endorsed each part of the deliverable. You will have seen it, you will have been engaged with it, just depending on how you want to be engaged. Is it just an informational? Do you want to have a liaison? These are some of the discussions that we need to have as we're building our engagement strategy and as we're building our project management plan.
So I guess that maybe this is a comment, which is that I think it's really important to not just have us endorse along the way, because sometimes we don't know what we don't know. And so, and none of us, to my knowledge, have the technical expertise to engage in these conversations, or we have different levels, but I'll just speak for myself that I don't know when there's necessarily like an important policy decision versus kind of, just something that's either necessary or just more of kind of an aesthetic or whatever. But I think what I really need is to be told concretely when there's a policy decision that needs to be made, along with the pros and cons, the cost benefit, and kind of really given options. And that's just how I think. I will be transparent that I have a master's in public policy, so maybe that's just the way my mind works, but that's that's what I feel like is missing in a lot of these processes, is that I'm not able to know sometimes, even when I'm making a decision, or that there was a trade-off that I missed. And that's something that I really think is critical, given what our job is supposed to be. I really want us also to maybe think a little bit differently about kind of the focus areas versus the whole. I think that should always be, and it is hard to kind of zoom in and zoom out. But I do think, even after the ROD phase of the work, as a shorthand, that we really continue to focus on the whole. And I don't mean that we're getting really granular in single family neighborhoods. That's not what I'm asking for. But I think when we only focus on the focus areas, we tend to get siloed and we're not able to zoom back out to think about what the goals are. So I think that's really important. I do generally feel like I am a little concerned about how much this process looks like 2020 to me. And I think if we repeat Chapel Hill 2020, we will lose more trust. We will do damage in this community. And so I think really figuring out what our lessons learned are from that process and not repeating that again is critical. That we can't do kind of make people feel like, get tons and tons and tons of input and go to every single person and be everywhere and be doing these things and using buzzwords and making people feel like, feel good that we're out there, and then it not resulting in something that people find tangible or actionable or understandable, or even see anything about what they showed up for in it. So I'm not saying that you've told me anything that you're going to do any of those bad things. You just haven't told me how you're not going to do those things. And I think that is something that we have to be really mindful of, because this community put in so many millions of hours into Chapel Hill 2020, and people did not come out. I mean, I don't know. I haven't talked to every single person because that was such a astronomical feat, but a lot of people did not feel good about that process. So I just don't want us to go down that same path again.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Michael, go ahead.
I think Amy was ahead of me.
Doesn't matter. Go ahead.
All right.
So yeah, I have first an overall comment, which is I think each of us probably has a lot of comments, a lot of questions, and I'm not sure we can realistically get through them all tonight. So I'm not sure that putting this at the end of a long meeting was the best choice. I think this topic probably could have supported a full meeting on its own. So I'll just make that comment. There's just a lot to unpack here. So Bill, to get to one of the things Jess mentioned, the way I like to think about processes like this, it's a sequence of decision making, and there typically ought to be a hierarchy of decisions. There are some big policy decisions that have to get made first, and then you basically funnel it down to smaller decisions. And I think it would be really helpful if it could be laid out, rather than open house 1 or engagement number 2, is lay out what decisions is the council going to have to make when, and then what information will the council need to have in order to intelligently make those decisions. And I think that's how we really need to be thinking about this process. It's not a lot, it's really what's the first decisions that we as a council need to make, because it can't be a process where everything is left to the end and then you get a big 200-page report and say vote yes or no on this report. That's an absolute formula for disaster. So I think that we really need to be focusing on decision making, number one. I will absolutely, again, I think Jess has said it, others have said it, this can't be only about the focus areas. It just can't be. We know, we've heard talk about creating neighborhoods, whether it's, how do we, if we want to increase density in single family neighborhoods, do we try to make our single family neighborhoods single family neighborhoods, true neighborhoods, by allowing community retail, which currently isn't permitted in those neighborhoods? These are questions that I think we need to grapple with. What is true placemaking in these places? And what do we need to do that would allow us to really revitalize a lot of parts of town? We talk a lot about racial equity, but let's really be honest about it. In a lot of our neighborhoods, a lot of our current zoning is the residue of racist policies. And how deeply do we explore our current zoning and our current as the residue of racist policies, and how do we redress that, and how do we fix that? I think that's really important. We haven't, in a lot of our other planning efforts, maybe it was a mistake, but typically at least a couple of key advisory boards have played important roles. Planning Commission, CDC, has historically played a role in getting to some of the details that the council either can't or shouldn't be involved with. And I haven't seen at all how we're going to be actually not just presenting to, but leveraging some of the expertise and the time and energy that the council doesn't have through some of these advisory boards to get some of this work done. And then, listening, there just appears to be a lot of opportunities for duplication, overlap, and potentially conflict. So, for example, for the TOD, one of the things that's going to be done is what can be built along the transit corridor. Well, the work that Rod Stevens is apparently going to look at what can be built anywhere in town. So it seems like number one, it's a potential duplication, and number two, it's just a waste of money to do everything twice and then bring somebody in to arbitrate the two different studies that we get. So, and then, in terms of public engagement, I'll just throw it out there. Maybe it's the wrong way to go, but Durham is going through their comp plan process right now, and they using these ambassadors who are actually folks that are paid to go into and work with the community. I don't know if that's deemed to be successful or not, but I'd be, at least like it to be explored to see if that's something we want to think about. But I think there's still more work that needs to be done in integrating what, Rod is proposing and what this proposes, because as I'm listening, a lot of the technical studies, it sounds like are going to be done twice. And I just don't understand why we'd do that. So if Rod if that piece of work is going to tell us what's available to build on everywhere in town, then clearly the transit corridors are a subset of that, and let's use it rather than, the SOM team doing their analysis and, and having dueling analyses, which rarely works well. So I've got other thoughts, but I don't want to take up everybody's time. But I think we need, I think I personally need some more time to digest this, because I'm sure tomorrow morning I will wake up with a lot more questions. And I think this is, again, I've said before, really important work, and we need to make sure we're really comfortable with how it gets done.
I'm going to jump in. It's getting late and we have a closed session after this. And I'm not going to cut off people's opportunity to speak, but I'm going to ask that you keep it to sort of key points. I think we all have probably a list of more detailed questions that maybe we can send in to staff, and it's clear that we're going to need another discussion on this. So I'll let Maurice and staff figure out what that looks like, but clearly we're not going to kind of resolve this entire plan tonight. So I'm just going to ask remaining commenters to keep it to key points, please, if you don't mind. Thanks. And I think Amy was next.
All right, lightning round. Okay, thumbs up for Jess and Michael's comments. For my own comments, I'm very concerned about the timing and the coordination with Rod. If he said he needed 3 to 6 months, and what I'm hoping we get out of his work is kind of the overall vision for what the town is that then informs all this other work. And I don't see how working in parallel that's going to be successful. Some of the timing doesn't work with the town schedule. You've got 2 council update briefings in the middle of the summer. That's kind of an issue. We don't generally work then. In terms of the council role, as we discussed in the earlier item, we need to be making those policy decisions. It's not just about us attending the open houses and listening and doing that. I agree with Michael on that whole, what are our decision points? Where do we need to be? Where do things need to be coming to council to say, okay, here's where we're going to take the left branch here or the right branch there. Now let the work proceed according to that. I am concerned that this work is being combined with the TOD grant. I understand why we did that, but when we have this monster of a TOD grant compared to how the size of our other money is, I just worry about how much that is going to drive the work that gets done. This is not, we are planning for the entire town. At the very least, the BRT is going to be held up for a number of years. And I have very big concerns for how this works. So, we can do, I know we got the money, we got to spend it, I guess, so we just do some very elaborate TOD planning, but I don't want the fact that we got money for this to be driving the bus of future plans for Trackerville. So there you go. Thank you.
Thanks, Amy. Other comments? All right, well, that was faster than I thought it'd be. But I'm not giving you more time, Michael, sorry. I will just wrap us up. I really agree, I think, with pretty much everything I think that's been said. I think the point about the decision making and the helping us to understand those decision points and trade-offs at each step so that we don't close the door inadvertently and then need to go back and say, wait, we didn't mean to do that or didn't realize. And we really want that expertise from you to help us, to help guide those decisions. I certainly agree with the timing. I think the public engagement between all of these efforts needs to be coordinated. I think we will burn people out very quickly. I don't think always more is better. I think the quality is what matters, and really thoughtful engagement, relationship driven rather than again and again and again. I absolutely agree with going beyond the focus areas. I liked that infusing density phrase that Colleen used. And that's a really important part of what we need to be doing. And I'll leave it at that, but I think, I feel like the comments you've heard have been pretty consistent. So at least that I think is helpful for you all. And it sounds like we'll need some more discussion on this soon. But that's not my job to figure out because I'm not the actual mayor. Staff, consultants, do you need anything else from us tonight?
No, thank you very much.
No.
This has been helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. All right. Well, thank you very much. I'm sorry. I hope no one was waiting, hoping to have time for public comment. We've gone past our meeting time already and have more ahead of us. Apologies for that, but please feel free to send in comments, emails, whatever works for you. And we will be now ending our work session and shifting to closed session unless there's anything I'm missing.
We all leave. Karen, you're last.
And first, Michael needs to read us into closed session. Is that the thing that happens next?
Yeah.
Mr. Parker?
Oh, man, it's good to be indispensable. I move that the council go into closed session as authorized by General Statute 143-318.11A3 to consult with the town attorney to preserve the attorney-client privilege. At the conclusion of the closed session, the council will adopt a single motion to end the closed session and adjourn the meeting without taking further action.
Second.
Do we have to all vote on that? Okay. Who's Councilmember Anderson?
Aye.
I don't have the list of Councilmember Barry.
Aye.
Who's next alphabetically? Ty.
Aye.
Paris.
Aye.
Amy.
Aye.
Adam.
Aye.
Oh, Michael. I can't alphabetize.
Aye.
And the mayor pro tem says aye. I have to be the last one on apparently, so see you soon.
Good work, Karen. Well done.